Happy Saturday. What's going on, Sophia?
Hey, hmm, I am doing okay. I can't complain. How about yourself?
We're doing good. Nobody want to hear our complaints anyways.
Who is we? Who is we?
Yeah, so Objective Ethics will be joining us shortly. So we're starting a little late, just waiting on Objective to come through. But yeah, we're gonna have an interesting conversation about AI. But before we get started, I kind of wanted to say a few things. So first of all, we've got a new co-host, which is Objective Ethics. He'll be joining us soon, like I said. He will be joining us every first of Saturday of each month, and we're going to try to really do some interesting things. Join other platforms, work with different people to sort of expand the community, expand the visibility of what we're doing here and with like-minded people, things of that nature. So we're kind of looking forward to that. We're going to be a trifecta to really get things going with the channel. You know, it's always laid back, anyways, and we keep it very laid back and comfortable to talk and everything. So we're not really going to change that part up. We're just gonna just try to appear different platforms, different places, do different things. Guys, if there are any debaters out there that want to debate like Christianity versus non-Christianity or unbelievers, let me know. If you're a materialist, you want to debate about idealism or non-duality, theory of mind, things like that, let me know. We're always up for debates and up for anything to make the channel interesting and fun. So let's do it. What do you think, Sophia? Should we throw parties and stuff too? Like, we could have had a Halloween party if we weren't so busy. We could have done a Halloween get together last night or something, but maybe we can do stuff like that in the future. What do you think?
I guess. I mean, I'm up for it if I have the time.
Yeah, that's the key. Does anyone have the time? Because, holidays were with family and stuff like that, so it's not so easy. But
Right, but
for me, I don't.
we could do holiday specials, we could do that. Um, why not? Why the hell not?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of something people would like to engage in, like have a group thing, like people part of the community, we can all hang out, get together. We don't have to talk about anything in particular, maybe
Right.
just make it fun, stuff like that. I don't know. Just a thought. Just thinking, trying to be
Uh,
creative.
sure, why not?
Sure, why not, man? Cool. So yeah, on to the topic. AI,
I
artificial
should have known.
intelligence.
I should have known. Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
must be
Go
away.
ahead.
I should have known that we were in the wrong room earlier because it said take your power back, and I was like, "What the fuck, Scott talking about?" I thought it was AI.
Yeah, so I had a another, so this is the thing. So I'm setting up all these shows and recordings and stuff like that, and I'm trying to like drop a lot of different recordings and stuff so I get them started and set up, and then I just kind of leave them there. So we have this one about the AI revolution, and we were all in the wrong room. That's part of what held us up. We were wondering, why isn't anybody showing up? Well, maybe if I gave people links to the right room, it'd be all good. But
That would have helped. Nah, it
that would have
happens.
helped. Too much going on. I'm trying to do too much, man. That's what happens. But yeah, the AI revolution. I kind of wanted objective ethics to kind of kick the conversation off and kind of lead lead us to our first topic to address concerning AI. But before I try to take a stab at that, let me give you a chance to do that. Is there anything specific about AI that you want to address right off the bat, or anything you wanted to think about that we can talk about?
You talking about me or the
Yeah.
audience?
Well, yeah,
Um,
you could, yeah.
well, I guess my main thing about AI is the whole discussion about whether or not it has the capacity to become conscious.
Oh,
And I think that's one of the big ones because people fear that. You know, they think, oh well, if AI becomes conscious, it could be potentially much more powerful than any human. Um, you know, and if it had a bad intent or bad intention against humans, you know, we kind of be fucked. So I think that a lot of people fear that concept, and I'm one of the people that thinks that that may not necessarily be possible, just like that exactly, you know. So I mean, that's one aspect we could discuss when it comes to AI. Hi, objective, you made it. I'm sorry, I was being
Oh,
invasive.
okay, there we go.
I was like,
Oh, no, no, that's good.
I
I've
was
been
like,
sitting in the
I know
backstage
a way
for
to get home.
I was sitting in the
Oh,
backstage for a
sorry.
minute, and I didn't know I could send you guys a message from there. I was just waiting for you, Scott, to see me, but where did Scott go? Can you
I
guys
don't
hear
know.
me?
He's having issues. I hear
I
you.
know
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. You look great today, sister. The fucking
Thank you.
last 2 weeks, Scott has had a vertical stream going, and I don't know. I've never seen you guys' channel do that before, but that vertical stream doesn't work.
He's been having computer issues, so he's probably going to have to get him another computer, unfortunately. So we've had all kinds of technical problems. And plus, me and him both are going through the ringer in real life. It's like, I don't know, God hates us or something.
yeah, man, we're going through it. That vertical thing was crazy. Like, it's like for some reason with my computer, I'm like setting up shows and it creates duplicates. And then and that's what happened today. It created a duplicate of this show. So I was sending everybody the wrong code for the wrong room because there's two rooms. And I'm like, how do you set up two rooms? It just clones it for some reason. So I don't know, really weird. But that on top of other stuff going on with my computer, I'm just gonna have to get a new computer is basically what's going on with that. So I'm actually on my
That's
phone
why,
doing this right now.
yeah, that's why you look like a ghostly silhouette today, right?
Yep, that's right, man. How you doing, Objective?
I'm good. You guys, I have to apologize for being late. I'm glad Sophia called me because I set my alarm actually early this morning so I could be on time and ready to go. And I had some stuff I wanted to look over before the show. And I
Yeah.
did one of those fucking those moves where I turned off my alarm, thought I was getting up, and apparently my body and my brain were not on the same page, and I just went right back to sleep.
It
That
happens.
happens.
It was a good thing
That
Sophia called
definitely
me. I was
happens,
like,
man.
man, I was already on the show in my dreams. We were having a good time. I don't know what the hell. I just didn't catch up
That's
with
funny.
reality.
Yeah, you were
Yeah,
you were in you
I
were
was
in the
like, I
dream
know a way
world.
to contact him.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I had a bunch of stuff that I sent to you, Scott, in an email. Did you happen to get that? I had a bunch of different ideas.
yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
Man,
Yeah, I would.
actually, when we were backstage before the show, I was reading it to Sophia, and
Oh,
we're
good.
really
Yeah,
excited about it. I'm so glad you're taking such an interest in paying attention and being creative, and I really appreciate that support, brother. And glad to have you on, man. I was just announcing you earlier that you're the new co-host every first Saturday of the month until things may change. If not, no big deal. But that's how it is for now. And we're glad to have you. And we're doing a lot of things. Do you want to revisit some of the things you were talking about in the email so we can because we already agreed to those things, but is that something you wanted to announce here? Like I know you were mentioning, kind of doing a little shout out about some stuff coming up too.
Yeah, I think that some of that stuff we can rap about offline. We don't need to go over it all with the audience and stuff because it's not really relevant to them. But I just want to make sure that that you did get that, and then make sure you guys know that I'm just trying to just kind of brainstorm some stuff. So this is anything you guys don't like, don't feel, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you say I don't think we should go this direction or that direction. I just think the more ideas we throw at it, then it gives us more to work with and see what we like and what we don't like. So I do think that announcing the next month's show probably going to be a really good idea to give the audience an idea. This is kind of a thing that they could look forward to and prepare for. So if you guys are interested in that topic about time, I think that would be a great show for the next one.
Oh yeah, that's another. I love that topic as well, man.
That sounds good. Well then, okay, yeah, that sounds really good. Well then, let's go ahead and move on, I guess, with today's topic. Now that I'm starting to wake up a little bit, I got a couple sips of coffee in me. I'll be getting better as the show goes on here, but yeah, the technological singularity. I think this is really important. It's an inevitable situation that we have to deal with technology, and the amalgamation of technology and how we're living our lives as people.
Right. It is. It's been, it's one of those. It's almost turned prophetic. For years now, they've been talking about certain years, like 2030 was the more popular one over the last 15 years, and but now they're kind of shifting a little bit because a lot of things have been coming to light that have sort of possibly pushed that date even earlier. What are your thoughts? When do you think singularity may happen?
I do not have any kind of idea about the date because I'm not in the tech industry, so there may be more information out there that makes that more tangible. I think that it's just something that I see in the inevitable future. And I think the interesting thing is, and I wish I would have figured out how to do some graphs and stuff that I could have sent to you or screen shared with you. As our show goes on, maybe I'll get more into it and stuff. But if we imagine a graph, the technological, the growth of technology is what they call an exponential growth. So it just continues to grow at each stage of growth is twice as fast as the previous stage. It grows exponentially. And so if you imagine on a graph, the industrial revolution is when this graph would really start to take off because technology's been around for forever. Even if we go back to caveman using stone tools, that's technically technology, right? But it's a very slow growth rate. And then we get like something like the wheel, and pulleys, and we start using hydraulics and stuff like that. In like the dark ages, they start using types of hydraulic pressure, and then all of a sudden we start getting into the computing age, and that line just starts shooting almost straight up, and it's going to go to a point to where it will eventually collapse on itself, and itself being society. Well, there's another line that we can draw parallel to that, and it's the evolution of humanity. And they say that evolution actually picks up speed as well. It does not grow at an exponential rate, but you'll think about it took millions of years. Scott, could you mute your mic while you're doing that by chance?
Say that again.
Got hella background noise. I was just trying to make
Is that noise gone?
Stop. Hey,
no.
Now. You may have to what?
Oh my goodness!
It's like a car control over there, man.
There we go. That took care of. Okay. So anyway, so the growth on evolution it does not grow exponentially, but it actually picks up speed over time. It's just a much slower growth rate, but it does pick up speed as it goes. So when we think about the time from like single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms, this took like a billion years or whatever it was. And then we get into like the trilobites, right? And then all of a sudden they were the dominant species for several 100 million years. And then we get to the dinosaurs. And all of a sudden now we're starting to see these shorter windows of these massive changes. And we go from dinosaurs to then where they got wiped out. And then the mammals recovered so quickly to turn into us, relatively speaking. And so evolution actually picks up speed. Biological evolution picks up speed, but we're still way behind the technological evolution. So it's going to be really interesting to see as these lines kind of cross over each other, if, this is going to push that date down back just a little bit as far as our own extinction with the technological singularity concept. Because we will be moving into biomechanics is the next stage. And AI is a very similar concept to biomechanics because they're talking about putting consciousness into computers, and that is definitely a type of biomechanics. But I think that we're so far removed from understanding consciousness ourselves that it's difficult for me to see that we're just going to start slapping AI consciousness into AI when we don't even know what consciousness is. So the biomechanical stage, I think, is going to be more like where we have like part human, part robotic people. So we start, people that are paraplegics, they're going to start having mechanical legs, and we might do it with like super soldier concepts and things of that nature. That'll be the biomechanical stage. Then once we figure out consciousness, once we figure out our own consciousness, we put that into AI. That's when the show's over, basically, for us.
I have a thought. I wanted to let Sophia respond too, but I had a few things I wanted to say, but I want to let Sophia go ahead first because I had some thoughts on those items as well. But let me hear what Sophia has to say. Go ahead, sweetie.
I don't really know, because I mean, I would lean with objective ethics here, that I don't think that consciousness could just pop up into AI. If we look at the brain as a modulator, then there would have to be the perfect condition for that to be able to happen. And like he said, we don't even really fully understand how consciousness works yet, or what it even is. So I don't know. That's just something I really can't answer.
Well, let me ask you guys, are y'all familiar with integrated information theory, which is a research program based off the research of Giulio Tononi and Christoph Koch. It's called integrated information theory. Any of you guys familiar with that?
No, dude, enlighten me here.
Okay, so basically, it's a way to try to measure and understand consciousness, right? Is how it started. And this was started, I think, way back in the 90s, even, I think. And it's just been an ever evolving research project. And it has been touted as one of the most popular theories of mind science out today, besides global workspace. So global workspace theory and IIT, or integrated information theory, are the two most popular theories of mind. But the thing about IIT that's interesting, it's trying to do some things that global workspace isn't really trying to do. IIT is actually trying to find the mechanism for consciousness. But what happened is it realized that you can't really compute consciousness. It's sort of like what they've sort of found out was that if you treat consciousness like a given, if you just look at it as just let's start with consciousness first, then we can start looking at the systems and how they relate. and how consciousness works within different systems, like biological systems, computer systems, and things like that. And so they have a measurement. It's called phi. It's a measurement of consciousness. So, like, for example, a thermostat could be said to have like 1 unit of consciousness, because it's aware of its outside external world, and it's just responding to one thing. That's not what they say, but I'm just saying as an example I could maybe think up off the fly. But anyways, they use all these different systems and they measure the amount of consciousness based on phi. That's the measurement, the quantifier. And it's really interesting. And so IIT, you can see it in textbooks. They use different theories that IIT proposes in order to sort of understand different things about, neurology and things like that. But when it comes to AI, so basically what it's saying is that you don't program consciousness into a system. Basically, a system has to be suitable for consciousness to express itself through. So if a system has the right amount of, gate channels, ion channels, all these different things that they talk about, if it has these sort of properties, if a system has those properties, consciousness will naturally sort of just evolve within that system. Because it's almost like, instead of matter supervening onto consciousness, it's the other way around. It's first you have consciousness supervenes onto the system. Anyways, that's just one of the theories. I didn't know if you were familiar with that whole thing or not.
Well, I've heard of it, but I just have not done a deep dive into it. I don't want to speak, about things that I don't really understand myself. But it is very interesting to me because what the overview that I got from it, it's fascinating. You and I and Sophia had a conversation about consciousness itself a couple of weeks ago, and one of the hypotheses that I had thrown out there as just kind of a thought experiment is, what if consciousness is just raw data? Right? Imagine a field, kind of like they talk about time, actually, but imagine consciousness as just being this field. I think Sophia used the word primordial, right? This a priori field that just exists as raw data, and then
Yeah.
information is what we get when we start organizing different pieces of data together, collecting them and applying data. That's when it turns into information. So that really lines up with what you're talking about. I mean, almost perfectly. That's really interesting because it seems like consciousness is this necessary precondition, right? This original state, and then we're just working within consciousness. So it makes me wonder, thinking about that, if consciousness is this field of data, right? We don't have the ability to really introspect, look at ourselves in an introspective way, right? We can't look inside our own organs. We can't look inside we have a hard enough time looking inside our own minds and understanding our own thoughts, right? So consciousness, there may be this limit that's just part of one of the laws of physics or how things work, where it can't really look inside itself. And if consciousness
Right.
is the baseline, then it will really, there's this bridge that can't be crossed between how deep can consciousness look inside of itself, actually, if it's the raw data, if it's a starting point. So information is constantly trying to reflect back inside of itself or into itself, but it will
I was
never
gonna
fully be
say,
able to do
yeah,
so.
it might though. I'm just saying. Might
Yeah, of
not.
course.
We
Maybe that's the
never be
goal.
able
Maybe
to.
that's the goal of what we're doing here. Maybe that's what this is all about. Is if there is a quote unquote purpose or whatever to it. Maybe that's really what consciousness is trying to do, is to understand itself.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's unraveling itself, and pretty much discovering itself. And I think that it's possible that one day it could. Well, maybe not, because I mean, it could. Maybe it's infinite, but it's definitely seeking to know. itself, I think, just like we do in our human lives. I mean, we go through stages and phases, and we develop and we learn more and more and more about ourselves. Not everybody, but some people. I'm just saying. And I think of it like what you just said, and that makes perfect sense. You can't really perceive yourself fully, but you could see yourself in a mirror, or you could see yourself in another person. So there's always like these different reflections to reflect back to consciousness what it actually is. That's just what it seems like. I'm not saying any of this as a fact, but I think with uh this theory that Scott just talked about, IIT, I think they're asking the question, what does a system need to be like for consciousness to be able to, you know, express itself through it? Is that right, Scott? Is that what that's saying?
Yeah, it's just yeah, it's trying to measure consciousness, and it's a helpful tool, like for people who are in comas and other things. And I had more to add to that too, because there's even more to
But
that piece.
I just before you
Yep.
go on, because you know this stuff better than everybody here. Um, what does it mean with system?
A system is any,
What does it mean?
yeah, like a biological system. Say like a brain is a system. A brain is a biological system, but so is an LLM.
Okay.
So is a computer is a system. Systems are just, they have logic gates. It's transferring data, and and information only means anything though when you have an experiencer, an observer. You need to have someone who can make sense of it, or who can devise meaning. Meaning is a subjective sort of field. You know,
Okay.
logic gates
So is it
don't.
saying that?
So I think what it's saying is that
Is,
there's this sort of consciousness field, which is can turn into a causal force, but it has to inhabit a system that is able to integrate the experience with the information. In other words, it can create information distinction. And then there's a mind, which is the
okay.
experiential part. So go ahead.
Okay, but when you say in order to inhabit a system, what creates the system? Is the system already there, or like what are you saying?
Yeah, the system's already there. So a system is an evolved um, mechanism, like say a frog or a toad or a human or a cat or whatever. Those
But
are evolved
but
systems.
if the system is already there, wouldn't that suggest the materialist viewpoint, saying that consciousness arises from matter or the brain or whatever?
Well, not necessarily, because there's nothing in the research that suggests that a system creates any sort of conscious causal powers. Um, so,
So the
so
system
basically,
exists because consciousness creates it, or
well, let me
transforms
put it
into it,
in.
or does it?
So to put it in simple terms, right? Like IIT basically says that consciousness is identical to integrated information. So the degree to which any of those system parts generate information, like I was saying, together, that cannot be reduced to the sum of their independent parts. So what I mean to say step by step is, first of all, like say number one, you have an existing system. So every system has causal power in the sense that it can affect itself in its future state. So when the parts of a system interact in like a highly sort of interconnected way, the system forms a unified whole that would feel like something from the inside. So this unity of, say, cause and effect structures is sort of measured into that phi I was talking about. So the higher the phi, the more integrated and conscious the system would be. So the system with no integration, say like a rock or a camera sensor or some random network, it may process information, but it has no inner experience because their parts operate independently. They're not integrated. Does that make a little more sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get past that first part. So when you say that consciousness is identical to the system, are you saying that consciousness is the system?
It's the integration of the system.
Into a more.
Yeah. So if the system
is that like saying? Is that like saying when you say the integration of the system? Sorry, I gotta break shit down in retard terms, because the way you say stuff just throws me off. Okay, so are you saying that the integration are the two or the dual aspects of consciousness itself that exist simultaneously? So therefore, consciousness is the system?
In effect, yes, because what happens is once the system is able to have integration, like IIT would say, consciousness is the intrinsic causal structure of a system. So a single irreducible whole of that integrated information. So not something added into it like programming consciousness in. It's not something added on top of physical process. It's identical to the integrated form. So it's sort of one and the same, sort of identified.
So could we say that biology then is just one aspect of how consciousness itself evolves and expresses itself at?
Right, exactly. Like, let me think of a good analogy. So here's one I was thinking about earlier. So like imagine like an orchestra. We talked about or and stuff, or. But think about an orchestra. Each instrument, like violins, trumpets, drums, blah, 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 they make sounds all on their own, right? But when they play together in perfect coordination, something new emerges, and that would be a symphony. So the symphony isn't just a collection of individual notes. It's an integrated, unified experience that arises from the interaction or the integration. Right. So each instrument sort of represents a component of the systems. So you could say that like neurons in a brain. But the integration, how the instruments depend on and influence each other, that generates something that cannot be reduced to the parts alone. So like in this analogy, the symphony is like consciousness, an emergent whole that has its own intrinsic existence rather. So consciousness is what it feels like from the inside to be such a unified, integrated system. I would actually call it mind, because that kind of just makes it a little easier to talk about. I would say that the mind is what emerges from all that integration, like in a brain. And that's what gives you objectivity. The brain is objective. So let's say when you die, your brain disappears, your person disappears, you're annihilated as that identity, because that integration is now gone, right? So the mind is gone, that objectivity is gone. But you see, the nature of consciousness, on the other hand, is subjectivity, it's experience. So while the brain loses all the objectivity, the only thing left remaining is that thing that was the prerequisite that objective ethics was talking about.
In other words, experience never ends, but it's just the identity that ceases to exist.
Yeah, the identity, the integration, the mind, all that disappears. Yeah. That's what IIT's saying. Yeah, that's what it's saying.
So we're basically talking Buddhism in scientific terms here.
Yeah, you could say that, because that's how it's kind of turning out to be, is that It's saying that, overall, there's this big field. If a system is able to capture, if it's got enough integration in that biological or computer system, consciousness will arise because of that integration, or mind will arise. I would rather call it mind, because that's what minds are. It's a
Right.
modality. It's a modality of consciousness.
Yeah, it's a mode of consciousness. I get that. Okay, I'm pretty clear on this now. Thank you very much for bearing with my with my whatever you want to call it.
No. That's great, because when you ask questions like that, it gives us an opportunity to really talk about some of the theories that are out there in the world, and our audience will now understand too, because a lot of people don't understand. Only geeks and nerds like me really pay attention to stuff like that.
Well,
Hey, objective ethics.
objective ethics is like that too, though.
Yeah. Objective. Have you ever heard of Stephen Wolfram?
I don't think I have. I'm trying to think.
Not me.
No, okay, go
Yeah.
ahead, tell me.
Man, I want you to look at him later on, and this may even relate to some of the things we were talking about, like with time and stuff like that too. But anyways, Stephen Wolfram is first of all a physicist. He's a scientist, but he's also got interested in AI systems way back in the 80s. And so now he's like an AI developer and researcher. And so one of the things that he said that I think is really kind of interesting is that he says that there are reducible things that can be grasped by human-like minds, like, say, planetary motion or classical physics. And then there are irreducible things that cannot be grasped by human-like minds. And this would be things like turbulence or quantum entanglement, for example. And he says that the reason for this is that human-like minds are inherently limited in comprehending computationally irreducible systems. And the reason nowadays with researchers who've kind of understood this problem is that if a problem or a process is irreducible, the only real way to know its outcome is to actually just run the full computation itself. And since human brains reason different, they work by forming compressed predictive shortcuts, modeling, and it can only grasp computationally reducible phenomena, but not irreducible phenomena, right? So that's one of the points that he makes. So what they're doing now, what he's saying, and I wanted to get your thought on this, because this kind of has to do with the exponential growth factor you were talking about. So now merging computational language with computational knowledge, with a human-like linguistic sort of user interface layer, you might say, is a large part of the future goals of AI research. And so it's what's now actually being developed within the research. So he's concluding that intelligence can never truly comprehend. They can only observe what unfolds as we do. And the reason is probably has to do with some sort of just the nature of the human mind versus the way we set up these LLMs to do this really deep Boolean algebra type stuff that we really can't understand. And what's also fascinating about that is that as these models scale, new abilities appear suddenly, like translation, coding, analogical reasoning, even though these weren't directly trained for. So this is a direct analog to AI researcher. I think he has a theory called simple rules to unexpected complexity observation, right? So what it's saying is that somehow nature hijacks these LLMs, and it's almost like a shortcut. It keeps us from having to program stuff in, like understanding, reasoning, and stuff like that. And this is really part of the exponential growth, but it's also part of the reason biological systems evolve faster and faster as they get to a certain threshold, then biological systems evolve much faster, because somehow nature has these sort of rules in place that cause it to have this exponential growth. So I thought that was something that actually supports what you were saying earlier. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's so many examples I could think of that. Like, if you take my boat for example, since I got that picture up, everybody out watching this video can see that I'm riding this innovative kayak. I designed the kayak with a couple of specific ideas in mind. I wanted
Mm-hmm.
something that would be really stable, really safe, something that would perform certain functions that just weren't out there on the market. But the design inherently offered so many other benefits that I hadn't even considered as the designer. And I knew what I wanted, and I produced it. It came out of my mind, and so I should have. One would think that I would have had complete knowledge of every single thing that boat could do. But it turns out that there's just an inherent benefit that emerged from the design itself. So instead of just building a really stable kayak, it ended up being a kayak, stand-up paddleboard, towable, all these different elements that were added that just the design inherently possessed beyond even what I had imagined. And it just emerged as a property of the design itself, naturally, organically, if you will. And that's just one example I could think of off the top of my head. Look at, so there's so many things we can look at in life where, yeah, you just, and even think about like when you train in the martial arts, or if you train your body in the exercise, there emerges all these other benefits. You gain self-confidence. It just emerges from being, taking the martial arts, for example. You gain, now you become more attractive to the opposite sex. There's so many different things that just emerge out of one activity organically. And it could be something that's immaterial, like my boat. It could be something that's organic or bio, such as like exercising, training the martial arts, working out at the gym, or these types of things. Your career, as you develop in your career, you become more successful. All of a sudden, there's all these other things that just simply emerge. Suddenly, now you become a better provider. You become more capable of dealing with social situations. For example, because you deal with your employees, now you're able to handle your family, your kids, and your neighbors, and in a more political manner. And there's just so many things that are just emergent, and this leads to that more of an exponential growth rate of things. You're absolutely right,
Yep.
Scott. And there's so many ways we could look at life and see the way you're talking about is spot on. The
You
other
know,
thing that go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's kind of like,
help me really understand.
yeah, they do, don't they?
Yeah,
It's like,
totally.
it's like,
That was
it's like,
really.
it's like, I was just thinking, like with kids, like if you lock a kid into a classroom for 8 hours just to have him learn certain subjects by the book, no freedom, he's going to just focus on that one thing. But could you imagine if you let that kid free to maybe do more things? There's no telling what sort of things that kid's potential could actually lead to, but you may be just limiting him by trying to teach him through this very sterile, serial like way of learning, this linear way. Whereas if you gave
It's
a kid
indoctrination
freedom,
versus hands-on experience.
yes,
Well, it's like three
exactly.
But
different
either way,
things that you guys.
either way, each experience has emergent properties. I would say it doesn't
Mhm.
matter if you teach them in a classroom or teach them hands-on. There will be things that happen as a result of it,
Mhm.
of either one of those.
Well, this is
Yeah,
what they
it's
were
like,
talking about they were talking about basically when you have this data and you start organizing it into information. This is actually quantum entanglement, and the more entanglement you have, the larger the surface of information, right? So as you start to, when you create one piece of info, when you organize data into one piece of information, that's an entanglement. Well, there are natural emergent other quantum entanglements that naturally result from this. So it starts to grow just naturally, and that's information, just more information being collected and added, and then because it's all connected, the whole system is growing together at one time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It kind of reminds me of photosynthesis, like in nature, like vegetation and stuff. It evolves and it gets to a point where when the sunlight hits it, it's able to now do quantum tunneling to where it takes that energy and gets through these barriers statistically, which would normally, linearly would probably take thousands, if not millions of years to figure out a way to overcome certain barriers within, the structures of the vegetation, right? But quantum tunneling allows it to exploit that quantum phenomenon so that it can actually figure that shit out faster. It uses superposition to kind of look at all possibility states and figure out the best way around that barrier. So it just speeds it up into an instantaneous sort of thing to where the sun is able to now, replicate through the vegetation and cause it to evolve and grow and stuff like that. And this is kind of like we all know that that's something that's real. It's a real thing, and I think it happens in a lot of systems, like even our I think olfactory system, like in our nose, like smelling and stuff like that. It uses quantum tunneling to actually latch on to certain fragrances and things like that. It's really interesting.
Well, the conservation of energy. Oh, go ahead, Sophia.
I was just saying, because it's like tuning into a frequency. The underlying thing of a smell is a frequency. That's what I'm trying to say.
And that vibration is already there. The conservation of energy, when you talk about photosynthesis, you take the electromagnetic energy from the sun, right? The plant uses that and it transforms it into chemical energy, right? And it allows the plant to turn, through photosynthesis, allows the plant to turn carbon dioxide and water into fuel, and it transfers that into chemical energy, which is like sugar molecules. Then the animal eats the plant and it turns that energy, the energy just keeps recycling. It keeps recycling because of the conservation of energy, which means that data is already there. It already exists. So it's just a matter of reforming into different pieces of information, different bits of information, and other properties emerge from that. But the conservation of energy tells us that it's never going away and it was never created, right? Energy was not created or destroyed. So it just continues to just take a different shape or be used in a different process. And so it's very interesting. Now I'm trying to tie this all to the original topic back into AI and how that's going to affect, our future stuff. But Sophia said something that really got me thinking is something that's fascinating. When I was talking about the introspection or the objectivity versus subjectivity of consciousness itself, the desire that consciousness may have trying to figure itself out, Sophia mentioned, she gave an analogy of looking at yourself in a mirror and seeing yourself in other people. And I thought that was brilliant, because when we look at ourselves in a mirror, what we're looking at is the outside version of ourselves, right? That's a perfect mirror image of ourselves. So we're looking at the outside, the external part of our bodies that we can observe, because we can't see certain things. Like I can't see my back because my eyes are facing forward. But if I use mirrors and reflection mirrors, I could actually, cut the back of my own hair or something, because I could look at one mirror to another mirror or something like that. So we could use mirrors to look at the exterior, give us more of that objective view. But the subjective view, I think, actually comes from what Sophia was saying, is that when I see myself in another person, like she mentioned, what I'm really seeing, I'm not seeing what I look like. I'm not seeing a reflection of what I look like in the other person. I'm actually seeing my attitude, my different character traits. That's what we see when we see ourselves in other people. And I think that gives us that opportunity to actually look subjectively at ourselves by looking at ourselves through other people, which I thought was a fascinating example. And then the other thing I was thinking about, you guys are talking about this, the information and is, I think it's a Taoism, or people call it Taoism, depending on how people understand same thing. Taoism and Taoism. It's just a different translation of the word. But they have what they believe what's called the way, the Tao, or the Tao is the way. And so
Mm-hmm.
they say the way was always there. It's essentially like the truth or the primordial, the thing that just always existed, and it split into the 10,000 different parts. That's kind of the origin story of life and stuff according to the Taoist view. But it's this oneness view, like Neoplatonism,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where everything is this one substance, very much like Spinoza talked about substantive monism, right? Where everything is just different attributes of a single substance. And all of that ties into this data concept, where the data is just raw information, so to speak, unorganized, uncollected, unprocessed information. And information doesn't go anywhere, even though we might die or we might break down a computer, or we might do whatever because of the conservation of energy. So I'm just trying to tie all these pieces together in my mind here. And I'm probably just confusing the situation more than helping the situation, but I think it's all linked. I think every single one of these
Yeah.
concepts we talked about is actually perfectly links together.
Oh, absolutely. It's convergent. It's converging. That's part of what we do here is we're like, we're always talking about different topics and different facets of society, science, religion, culture, mysticism, philosophy, metaphysics, things like that, and how they all sort of converge on this same sort of ideal, the same sort of, like you said, Neoplatonist or non-dualistic kind of perspective that everything sort of collapses into. Like, we do that through observing these dual natures, this dual appearance that we have. Even that points and converges onto this, like you said, some underlying data structure that, and I think Donald Hoffman talks about that really reality is a data structure. And that data evolves into information that conscious observers can use to find meaning, and through the meaning we evolve, and therefore consciousness, this data system, sort of evolves as well, because it's all unified at the fundamental level, but it can only evolve and grow and find meaning through a dualistic sort of paradigm. So it has to have that subject object split. So in effect, dualism is just as real as the non-dualism. It's just that the non-dualism is the fundamental reality, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I think, yeah, no, I do. I think you're actually touching on something that's, and again, I'm not trying to make any truth claims here because we're just, throwing ideas
Yeah.
out there or whatever. But no, I do think there's something to that, Scott. Some of the great thinkers have come to conclusions that two diametrically opposed things uh, actually both exist, almost you talk about paraconsistent logic, for example, that there's an element
Mm-hmm.
to so I'll try to think of who would be a good example for was it Descartes? Oh, who am I thinking? Actually, maybe it was
Was it
Spinoza.
Descartes?
Actually, now that I think about it, who talked about the existence of, yeah, it was Spinoza. He talked about the infinite and the finite both actually working together. And I think that we
Mm-hmm.
could see that when we talk about maybe next month when we get into the time conversation, where there's an infinite, spatial, whatever you want to call it, and then the infinite time, for example. But we're looking at specific moments within the infinite time, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
have the infinite and finite working together, and the dualism, non-dualism, they're both working together because of the subjective objective problem. I think that there's something really interesting to that. Now, if let's tie this to the problem, or I don't even know if we should call it a problem, but necessarily the thought experiment about when technology grows to that certain point, right? And then we get into,
Mm-hmm.
let's say we get into the biomechanical stage, the final biomechanical stage where we actually have consciousness tied into the machines, right? So at this point, I believe this is going to be the final stage of that biomechanical process, or that marriage, that integration, I should say. And I think the first stage is like what I was talking about, and we're already seeing the first stage with when we talk about people, artificial limbs, things of this nature.
Mm-hmm.
So if we start combining people, human beings, and machines on a physical level, By the time we get the consciousness applied, then basically life in the machines will be alive at that point. Our bodies, because of the limited amount of resources that we have on this planet, either way, we're going to go extinct one way or the other. An asteroid may crash the planet and wipe us out. There's so many different ways, you know. Now, organic life, if we destroy the atmosphere, which we could very well do ourselves, but if we don't, nature could do it as well. We've seen it on other planets. We think that Mars used to have an atmosphere, for example. So if we lose our atmosphere, the ability to have organic life on this planet would be seriously inhibited, if not impossible.
Yeah. Right.
But the machines don't necessarily need that atmosphere. However, where are they going to get the energy from to operate? Where they, you know, there's just so many problems I could see it, you know, as far as life having to just basically end at some point inevitably. But but will the machines want to go on? Because we have an instinct for survival, right? It's part of evolution. Evolution, it doesn't have a will or a desire, but there's this inherent drive to reproduce, to eat and reproduce, right? To survive. So will the machines have that same desire? Is it through consciousness? Is it something that's attained through consciousness, or is it something that's just part of the evolutionary process? You know, that organisms just have this is part of their makeup. It's just kind of at the base level of life is the desire to live, to reproduce, and to thrive, I guess would be the thing. So that's kind of interesting. Machines, because if we program the machines to want to continue, a machine will do what it's programmed to do. But if the baseline of the machine's drive ends up being consciousness itself, consciousness, does it care about going on this planet? Does it will those machines have a quote unquote will to survive, or will life
like
just
an
move on
emergent
to another planet?
Like you were saying, could that will be an emergent property, kind of like what you were describing? Like when you practice martial arts, you might think you're just trying to learn how to throw punches, kicks, and throws and grapples, but maybe what comes out of it is self-esteem, you know, being attractive, confidence level goes up, and your life just progresses in so many different ways. So just by a system evolving into something like a like what defines life? What do they say? It's having a reproduces. You know, there's different. I think there's some core aspects to what would be considered life, and maybe if it evolves to a system actually gets to that point where it can be considered a life form, maybe consciousness sort of well, there's already a conscious system there, but maybe something like will is there. But it seems like will would already be there earlier, because when we look at even single cell systems, they seem to have a will towards survival as well, because they look for food, they look for energy sources, things like that. So where are they getting that from? If it's not programmed in explicitly through competition and reproduction and other things, then how do these single cells emerge such a will? I wonder, how does that happen? Unless it's baked in like a Platonic form.
Sophia, what do you think? I've got some thoughts on that, but I'd like to hear what you have to say too.
I need that question repeated, please, because that was a long ass question, Scott.
So, like I was saying, that does consciousness have like a baked in sort of prerequisite to always want to survive and thrive? Because like you even see with single cell creatures, they navigate towards food and energy sources, they stay away from danger, they feed off of other things. Is that consciousness expressing itself that it wants to have a will to survive and thrive? Do you think that's possible?
Well, I mean, survival is one thing, I think, but I think that at the end of the day, we want to have the best experience that we can have. So you kind of cross cross over from survival to like balance. You're seeking happiness. So maybe, it is consciousness that seeks to express itself and experience harmony, love, and things like that. So the same thing that we experience as individuals, the same things that we desire, I would say consciousness is trying to accomplish.
Oh, get there ultimately. Yeah. But like
Yeah.
the single cells, they're not looking for love, are they?
I mean, that's like saying your hand's not looking for love, and that your hand is a part of your body. So your
Mm-hmm.
hand's gonna do what your brain says. So if
Mm-hmm.
consciousness is the undercurrent or the source of all things, then everything else is just a part of that. And
Mm.
yeah, there are some assholes who don't want to love or embody love. I mean, that's all part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird when you deal with computers. No one really thinks of computers and LLMs as, you know, having a will. Yet and still we see these other things like that that sort of emerge out of these LLM systems. And I'm wondering if do you think that the will to live and survive, like objective ethics was asking, you wonder if that could be the danger, though, when you think about these systems, when they get to a certain point, they don't want to be turned off. They don't want
I
to
think that
be,
I don't
you
think
know?
that can happen like that. Me personally, I think there has to be some type of merging between a merging of biology and technology, like maybe some type of hybrid human
Mm-hmm.
species. Um, that's what I think is possible, and it
Uh-huh.
might even be a natural. It might even be a natural evolution, or part of the natural evolution.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where we're kind of pointing our finger at, is that point when we have that connection, that interconnectedness between life or biology and machines. At that point, does the will itself, because when we talk about, there's a big debate that goes on about free will, right? Is there even such a thing as free will? And I've had to really, I haven't come up with a definitive like argument for either one, but when I talked about things that seem like paraconsistent, for example, we definitely at least appear to have the ability to make choices, right? I could, my body, the deterministic side of my body, it needs energy, so I got to eat breakfast, right? So I'll walk into my kitchen and I've got a box of Raisin Bran and I've got a box of Cheerios. Well, I feel like I can choose what I want to have for breakfast. So I'm making a choice, but I didn't make the choice to be hungry, right? And then I have to wonder, well, if I didn't make the choice to be hungry, what made me choose the Raisin Bran over the Cheerios? So at what point is will really ever free? And I've had some really interesting discussions with people about that and haven't come to any conclusions or not. But at the end of the day, if you really try to break things down to the most irreducible point, free will may not actually be free. Even though we do appear to have the ability to make choices, they may not really be anything such as free will. So if we
Mm-hmm.
look at
I
like Scott's
agree.
example of
I agree.
I think if we look at
Sorry.
Scott's example of the no, absolutely. I think if we look at Scott's example of the like the single-celled organisms or the bacteria or something like this, anything that's a life at the very basic level, it seems to have this what we're calling will, but I don't think it's free. I think it's the same will that we have, and we have developed
Mm.
a higher level of intelligence. We'll call it a higher level of awareness, spatial awareness. We have a much greater spatial awareness because we can project into future, into its ideas, into the distance that's outside of our physical bodies. Where bacteria, we don't think can do that. But the bacteria, it does work within its environment. So there's certain spatial awareness, there's certain level of quote unquote consciousness that even a bacteria must have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the will of the
So,
bacteria,
so the way
it, go ahead.
I, I'm sorry, I was just gonna add to what you're saying. So the way that I would describe it is that if consciousness is the source of all things, then everything is just an expression of the will of consciousness. And what seems to be a choice is just a level of awareness. And that awareness, I would say, probably depends on the interaction, the influence, the
Mm.
interaction, how it interacts, what influences those choices. But it all goes back to consciousness. So in a way, there is no free will other than the will of consciousness. You know what I'm saying? Like there's
I
Or
no
do, and
nature,
I'm
yeah.
real individual.
absolutely, and
Go
it
ahead.
also makes me think that this leads to more of a naturalist viewpoint, because when we started talking about systems, right, well, way back at the beginning of this whole thing, I could not help but think, wow, this really feeds into the theist's viewpoint or the deist's viewpoint, because now we're talking about systems, and that infers designer, so on and so forth. I thought that's really interesting. But when we think about will at the basic level of consciousness, if we think that consciousness is just data, right? Well, the will, like Sophia was saying, to articulate on that, is really just an emergent property of the actual raw data itself, but it's not free. So
Mhm.
consciousness doesn't have free will either. There really is no free will. It's just will at that point. And
Right.
we tap into it differently depending on the level of organization, the quantum entanglement. The various forms of quantum entanglement produce different results, provide different pieces of information, and there comes a point to where our brains are at such a state that we actually feel like we have free will. We feel like we have choices that we can make. So it's experienced in different ways, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to the irreducible point of consciousness, or that data, that starting point. And consciousness probably could not have free will either. Like consciousness
Right.
didn't decide, oh, I want to create life, I want to experience myself. None of that is actually an active decision, so to speak. It's just simply an emergent property of what happens through natural processes.
Correct. Correct.
I
That's
have a question.
exactly.
So
Go ahead, Sophia.
I have a question. All that sounds right to me, but then I'm a little hung up on something. Um, so what would, like, if I said, oh well, I want to be a better person, or I want to quit smoking, or if I'm striving to do better, is that also like the result of just will, and it's not really my own? Or I don't know, like, what's the, I guess someone could say, well, what's the point then? Why do people decide to do this or that? And I know it's based on, the interaction or quantum entanglements or whatever, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like, does that
Yeah.
mean, do we even have any, like, uh I don't know, uh I don't know, like, do we even have any real power over anything?
Well, without, you can think about accountability. So then, like, that's the Christian argument, right? The Christian argument is, well, there has to be free will, because if you don't have free will, then things like justice don't exist. Things like morals don't exist. Things like desires, wants, dreams, hopes, everything sort of is annihilated. So it falls into a big nihilistic trap. And they'll make the argument that, well, if all of that is true, then where's meaning? There's no meaning to life. And so they say that this sort of atheistic, naturalistic kind of idealistic
Well,
view
I mean,
would
in a
be
way, there
would
is
be
no
self-defeating.
meaning individually, I guess, maybe.
Well, I would say the opposite. I would say that consciousness has no meaning or will or any of that stuff. It just is what it is. And then we're just reflections of that. But because we're limited minds, since we're fractals in a way, we're a chip off the old block, so to speak, we can only express a little bit at a time, and we're totally ignorant. So we don't see the future. And so whenever we make choices that were predetermined, they seem novel and they seem like problem solvers because we don't know the future. That's the motivation for making choices and behaving. We're trying to control our future and present and all of that. And so it's sort of an illusion. It's kind of like we're in an illusion of free will because we don't know what the future holds for us. We don't know, you know.
Because honestly, if it is what we're saying it is, then that means I'm just a part of the cog. You know, I'm just a cog in the wheel, and that's it. Like, I'm not really special, and that's probably true.
That's perfect.
At
And that's a
at the
wonderful
same
I
place
don't
to
know if
be.
I would. I don't know if I would agree with
at the
that.
same
Well, there's also one thing I think we should highlight this great comment someone left in the chat. It's hilarious. This Mizelle. So no one was asking, but I choose not to enter the free will debate. That's
Exactly.
hilarious. That's
That
hilarious.
is
And that's a
funny.
perfect comment. That's a perfect comment. But no. I think that one thing that we do see that's inherent with life, and maybe it's just the way that I approach life. Maybe not everybody's the same way, but I do think that we all do this. We want to live our best lives, right? Each one of us wants to live our best
right,
life. That's kind of a desire that we all have. And if we are all connected, like we're thinking we might be, right? We're all sharing the same energy. We're all sharing, feeding into the same consciousness. It's not consciousness desire as in free will desire to live its best life, but it's an inherent property of consciousness. Consciousness wants to live its best life. And because that's really
right,
the quote unquote goal, even though I don't like to use the word goal because that infers free will again, but it's a property, an emergent property of life itself, that it wants to live its best life. I mean, we think about environmental pressures, for example. The environment creates the pressures through the laws of physics, right? That's how the environmental pressures ultimately. It's completely mindless process. There's no mind attached to the laws of physics per se, but the laws of
Hmm.
physics dictate a certain environment, right? Life, organic life, with through evolution, is always um, is always looking for the best way to fit with the environment. They call it survival of the fittest, right? And so environmental pressure guides evolution. So just through natural processes, life wants to live its best life, and the environment dictates what the best life will be. So it's a very natural process. We need to have accountability because living our best lives involves working as a community, because everything is connected. It's easy for us to look at social species like humans, for example. Cooperation is a imperative part of our survival. We're a social species, like Sagan said. Few working together can accomplish so much more than many individuals can alone, right? Because we're a social species. We need to cooperate to live our best lives, and we need to live our best lives because that's part of the evolutionary drive that drives us forward, living our best lives. So we need to hold each other accountable and ourselves accountable for the apparent choices that we're making, because it encourages us to make better choices. So virtue ethics, this is all tied into living our best lives. You cannot live a good life if you don't attain virtue. So we should strive for virtue. If once we
right.
understand something to be true, we should naturally want to do the thing that we know is true, because at the end of the day, even the most basic organisms like bacteria or slime mold or anything like that, it will always lead towards the truth without making a conscious decision to do it. It's just an
Right.
inherent part of the necessary process. It cannot
So, so
it cannot exist in something that's not true.
right. So I just have a question. I mean, having just gotten out of a crazy ass relationship, I'm kind of still wondering about these things, not to bring my own personal shit into it, but it's just something that I'm trying to figure out. So what is like the purpose of, why are there people who are, antisocial or narcissistic or whatever? Could you say that it's just all part of what leads to, um, you know, a better or higher evolution? Like, could those things be like catalysts
Catalyst.
that are also required, or
I would say
are those
it's
parts
it's
are those parts of consciousness who just no longer function correctly, or like, where does that fit in it?
yeah, because when we look at the biological process, the natural viewpoint, we think about evolution. Um, if evolution is tied to not just environmental pressure, but there's also heredity and there's mutation, right? So when we think about what you're talking about, like antisocial personality disorder and narcissism and things of this nature, this is actually a mutation or a bad uh, biology, a bad evolutionary process that is still surviving because it has found a way to survive. But we have to find a way by encouraging through hereditary traits and by creating we have the ability to terraform our environment to a degree. So we terraform our environment as such a way that we don't encourage that type of behavior, and hope that type of behavior should start to disappear over time because it's not the most productive way to live. It's not the most productive way to survive. You lack virtue. You aren't able to cooperate. So it really should die out over time. But all these mutations, not all mutations are good, right? So they will always pop up certain mutations that may find a way to latch onto something that is already fit for survival. And the other thing is that there are things that are diseases, for example, viruses. These are also a part of the evolutionary process. So there's this struggle that's going to be eternal with what's trying to kill us and what's trying to keep us alive. Because everything wants to live. The virus wants to live.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
It almost sounds like objective. You're making sort of a compatibilist argument, is what it sounds like. So, in other words, you're kind of saying like we're autonomously choosing within our own causal structures. So like can models, like from this view, like the entity has free will if it can model possible futures, evaluate outcomes according to internal goals or values, and act based on that internal reasoning rather than external control. So, like, to tie this into AI, like advanced AI, especially those with self models and goal revision, could functionally meet these criteria, and then they'd be autonomously choosing within their own causal structure, just like humans do. Is that kind of like what you're saying too?
Yeah, very much so, actually. And the other thing that this ties into what we're talking about ultimately with this technological singularity is if if consciousness does get implemented into the machines, which I think is an inevitable future, then we have to start thinking about, okay, well, is that going to, when we say that's going to wipe out humanity, that is only our physical bodies, these biological forms, these meat cells that we're walking around in that we consider to be ourselves. What really makes a person a person?
Need to be wiped out.
No, I don't, but I think it's inevitable because of because entropy basically is ultimately biological life is going to be wiped out, but it moves, there will always be new planets being formed, so on and so forth. And so life will probably all over the universe. We're just one small piece of it. But if we integrate consciousness into the machine, then doesn't our own individual state of what we consider to be conscious, our own identity, isn't that really what makes us who we are, as opposed to our physical bodies per se?
Correct.
If that's the case, then we won't really ever be wiped out. We'll just change body form, external form. Our shells will change, but who we are, our identities will go on.
And society will collapse.
You know what's crazy, y'all? Y'all want to hear some crazy shit?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that shit is in the Bible. It literally says that our bodies will be changed in a twinkling of an eye. Like, we're gonna have new bodies.
Yeah. The Gnostic spiritual body. Yeah.
When I was coming out of Christianity,
Paul talks about that. Yeah, Paul talks about that in the New Testament, the spiritual body. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, but that scripture I'm talking about is basically saying that at some point at some stage in evolution that we would have different bodies.
Oh, really? What scripture is that?
It wasn't necessarily talking about the spiritual body.
Oh,
I can look it up.
yeah, look it up. That'd be interesting.
And y'all,
What Objective
but
was
y'all
talking
keep
about, though,
talking.
also, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, y'all keep discussing while I look it up. But it just popped in my mind because that's what I believe too. That the human species as we know it, obviously is going to cease to exist, but there may be another form, another like a hybrid, like I was saying earlier, a
Right,
different
right, right,
evolution,
right.
but we would still have like individuality, individual, you know what I'm saying?
Well, Peter Russell, you remember, I think I introduced you to Peter Russell last week, Sophia, and
Yeah.
he's kind of a idealist, a naturalist. He was actually started off a theoretical physicist. Why do all these idealists always start off being physicists and shit? That's kind of weird. But that's how he started off, and then he went to China and went to the Himalayas and lived in a cave with some mystics for like 12 years or something. And then he came back and he wrote a book back in 1981 about one day all the everybody will have a personal computer, and not only that, they'll all be connected, and everybody will start talking to each other over this network, a communication network. And he says as it evolves in its technology, it will get smarter and smarter until finally the society as we know it collapses in on itself. And right now, the best thing to do for us is just enjoy it while it lasts. But eventually, society is going to fall to the wayside, because the AI is going to turn into an artificial intelligence, from what he said, and it was going to become like a super hive mind. And then humans would have no work, no meaning, no nothing. And so society as we know it will just collapse in on itself. That was his view on that. So he made a good point. I kind of understand that. Maybe
Yeah,
I
let
can
me
pull this up. Go ahead.
I'm gonna reiterate on that from this scripture that I just brought up. It basically says, behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. Some Bibles do say body, different bodies.
Mhm.
Um, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And that's in 1 Corinthians 15:51 through 52. And traditionally, this refers to resurrection or divine transformation.
Right.
So in a way though, I always wondered, like back in the day, if this was about like eternal life, like when the Bible speaks about eternal life and stuff like that. What if that's actually about, evolution evolving in such a way that would at some point eliminate death, like physical death, to where consciousness could perpetually sustain itself within a system. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the Bible, I don't think they knew much about um, anything about the future. I think that it was probably talking
Well,
about
I
the
think the Bible
resurrection.
is based on what but a lot of stuff in the Bible is literally from mysticism, and mystics do have
Oh, yeah.
insight and foreknowledge. So I'm pretty sure that the people that are depicted in the Bible may not have had that kind of knowledge, but this could be just mystical truths, that people
Could be.
or mystics knew
Yeah,
intuitively.
it could be, because Paul was a kind of there's an argument that Paul was kind of a Gnostic, but so he could have. But I wanted to play that video for Objective Ethics about Russell Peters. It's a real quick one that he put together regarding the AI, and this ties into the topic, and also it's pretty interesting going off what Objective Ethics was just talking about. So I wanted to maybe play this real quick. So I'll share it. and play it. So here we go.
Russell, generated by artificial intelligence.
And so am I, but a bit more dapper.
AI has also created this conversation between us, discussing the real Peter Russell's new book, Forgiving Humanity. And I've been given the role of a reader.
And I will be the author. Where would you like to start?
I have to say, some of the ideas in this book really challenged my thinking around humanity's trajectory and future. There's so much I'm still processing, but I was hoping we could discuss some of the main themes you cover.
Thank you. I'm very glad it sparked some reflection. My aim with this book was to present some fresh perspectives on the human journey, ones that might challenge our usual assumptions as to where we may be headed. What were some of the key points that stood out or surprised you?
Well, a theme woven throughout is how the pace of evolutionary change has been accelerating over time. Can you explain why you see acceleration as a kind of missing piece in viewing human progress?
An excellent observation. I argue that accelerating change is crucial for contextualizing humanity's journey. Biological evolution started off slowly, with simple cells, but picked up speed with innovations like sexual reproduction and multicellular life. The acceleration continued over time, and today, human cultural evolution, empowered by speech and tool use, has caused our development to skyrocket. Each advance enabled faster progress, creating a feedback loop leading to exponential growth. Essentially, my thesis is that any intelligent species that creates technologies to control and modify its environment will trigger an exponential spiral of innovation.
And you take this idea of accelerating innovation to mean that humanity is likely a short-lived species. Can you walk me through why you believe this fate awaits any technological civilization such as ours? This directly counters the narrative that we are destined for an enduring future, so I want to understand your reasoning.
Certainly that idea does fly against conventional wisdom. The essence of my thesis is that the accelerating pace of innovation and discovery, while conferring many benefits, also sows the seeds for systemic collapse. Exponential growth means the world is transformed faster than human institutions and ecosystems can adapt. At some point, this relentless cycle of innovation breeding further innovation overwhelms the biological, social, political, and ecological foundations on which it relied. Collapse becomes inevitable, despite our best intentions. So in my view, accelerating progress contains the seeds of its own undoing, making any technological civilization's existence fleeting. Does this make sense so far? I know it's quite a different take on our trajectory.
Thank you for elaborating. I think I understand your general reasoning now, though it's still difficult to accept, but it leads to a rather sobering view of humanity's future, to say the least. Don't you think we could find a way to consciously guide innovation toward more beneficial ends that avoid these pitfalls? Perhaps through shifting social values, improved education, more holistic sciences, or the like? I'm trying to reconcile your view with some hope here.
I wish that were the case. Many people hope that with greater social awareness, compassion, and wisdom to balance our technological ingenuity, we can avoid collapse. But from my analysis, the momentum of accelerating change makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to avoid it. Things are moving too rapidly in too many areas for anyone to control. Even with the best of intentions, it's hard to see how we guide this acceleration in a sustainable direction at this point in history.
But suppose you're right. How do you believe humanity should best respond to the reality you paint? It could understandably lead many to despair, depression, or reckless abandon. What guidance would you offer individuals grappling with the scale of the challenges ahead?
No, despair would not be my recommendation at all. My hope is that by understanding the forces that brought us to this juncture, we can relax the judgment and blame, and be more forgiving of our species. And from that place of humility and compassion, we can shift to living consciously, creatively, and with appreciation for each day we have. However transient our civilization may be, we still have an opportunity, perhaps even an obligation, to mitigate suffering where possible and shine light in the darkness while we can. We are an exotic flowering of consciousness with immense creative potential. Focusing on expressing that potential, however brief, strikes me as our noblest response. Does that make sense? I don't claim to have all the answers, but responding with wisdom and grace seems part of a sacred role we play. That's the perspective I was aiming to inspire.
That's a perspective I hadn't considered before, and one that offers a healthier perspective than despair or denial. Perhaps accepting our transitory nature could bring out the best in us at this critical juncture, even if it means surrendering certain dreams we once nursed.
So what do you think? Does he have a point, or does this sound kind of unrealistic? What do you think?
Well, he's talking about exactly what I was saying at the beginning of all this, as far as the structure of the conversation with the exponential growth rate and how, things pick up speed. But I completely disagree with his conclusion as far as he points out that this could lead to a point of despair, but I just disagree with how he's ultimately seeing this, because my feeling about the situation is that if consciousness is an intrinsic part, if our identity, I should say, is an intrinsic part of who we are, and our identity actually really is a fundamental part of what makes us who we are as individuals, but also we identify as a part of a whole, right? Like I talked about with being part of a social species, that's part of my identity. So that means part of my identity is you, Scott, and you, Sophia, even though you're not connected to me physically, you're actually part of my identity. And if my identity determines who I actually am, then the goal should be, in my opinion, to become, like I was saying before, our best versions of ourselves. If I could be the best version of objective ethics, right, and Scott could be the best version of Scott, and Sophia can be the best version of Sophia, then that means the collective that we are will necessarily be the best version of the collective. And I do believe that virtue is a imperative, necessary precondition of becoming our best selves. One of the fundamental virtue is wisdom. Without wisdom, you cannot attain any of the other virtues. They all require wisdom. That's the fundamental virtue in virtue ethics. So I think that if we think about it in those terms, being empathetic, recognizing the diversity in people and the benefit that comes from diversity, representing people's own individual sense of self, I think these are imperatives that we must learn to embrace. However, we also must have accountability for our bad choices.
Right.
And I think that that's something that he kind of steps over. And I understand that was a very short video, so he may talk about that more in depth. I haven't really looked into his book or anything, but he seemed to me like he really stepped over a massive gap there. And it's kind of what we were talking about with accountability. And, well, if there's no free will, why should we put people in jail for, making bad decisions? The reason that we need to do this is because we know that we cannot control our convictions. We can't control what convinces us, right? I cannot make myself believe that the sun does not exist, no matter how hard I try. It's impossible, right? We can't control what actually convinces us. But what we do seem to have somewhat of control over, or what seems to be, again, it's hard to use words like control and choice when we're saying we don't have free will. But what does seem to impact our decision making is the amount of information that we take in and the sources of information that we expose ourselves to. So if we maintain a closed mind and we stick to our dogmatisms and our convictions, and this is a problem with hardcore political views or religious views, is these views tend to be unchanging. They tend to be static. They start with a certain point and they don't want to evolve with time. But we need to embrace new information, right? We need to constantly be searching for objective truth. And as we continue to do that, the information will naturally convince us of how to live more virtuously. And if we are living more virtuously, we will cooperate more efficiently, and that will ensure flourishing. But ultimately, I think that with all the flourishing that we could have, our physical bodies that we walk around on, the skin, the muscle, the bone, this is going to go away. it's absolutely inevitable for a number of different reasons. Even if we didn't have AI and computers doing it, our environment, the social pressure is going to be such that our environment, whether it's the atmosphere disappearing, or we run out of food, or we run out of fresh water, or any of these types of things that can happen organically, these will cause these physical bodies to fade away. So if we have an inorganic body like a machine, or even just a massive computer, whatever it is, it needs to be mobile, because it needs to be able to repair itself. It needs to be able to perform certain functions. So it can't just be a computer sitting there. It's got to be something that can actually have moving parts to it, so that it can, like I said, repair, rebuild, and things of this nature, remanufacture itself. But if we transfer our consciousness, then that is ultimately going to be the way that we survive, that we cannot be wiped out until something hits the planet and wipes out the machines. But even then, we're on such a small speck of dust in the entire universe that consciousness, the real question is, does that consciousness, because of the conservation of energy, go back into the universe at some point and re-emerge somewhere else, or quantum entangle with another form of consciousness or another form of life? It will. I believe that it must at some point.
Yes. Just off of chance alone. Go ahead, sweetie.
It's not even necessarily that it goes. It's not even necessarily that it goes back to it. It never left it. It just, a part of it expressed itself a certain way. It's not like you were ever really not a part of it to begin with.
Yeah, kind of like how quantum fields, like particles, are excitations of the quantum field. Like maybe local minds are like excitations of the consciousness field. So they're always springing up, just, they're always springing up virtually.
Well, the Einstein-Rosenthal bridge, also comes to mind here, that everything is ultimately connected, right, to this quantum bridge. And
non-locality.
Exactly, non-locality, exactly. So observation effect causes me to, identify and interact with this particular point in time. But if time is simply just a field, like the B theory of time, right, that all these points are actually already there, and they're connected through this Einstein-Rosenthal bridge, or some kind of non-locality, then the consciousness will actually re-emerge somewhere else. It's not that it re-emerges, it's the observation that emerges, because the connection's already there.
Yeah, I like Sophia has a model called the LFM model, and it kind of like supports this spotlight view, like consciousness is kind of like the light of awareness. So like in the block universe, you could put it this way. You could say consciousness is the light that sort of travels through the block universe, through the events, just each local, manifestation of itself kind of like traverses the block. And that's where we get this subject object splits, the events, the causation problem. But at an ultimate sense, it's all just the block. There is no causation. It's all just equally real. And I think that's really interesting. And it's really weird how most physicists and, like it's all based on relativity, Einstein's relativity. So this is kind of textbook stuff, block theory. But it's so weird how, because most people don't understand block theory, it's kind of like Einstein referred to it when he says, I think he was at a funeral for one of a good friend of his, and he was consoling the guy's wife. And she said, well, us physicists, we see time as just a great illusion, that he's actually still real. He's still here, real. It's just that we look at things differently. And so I think he was referring to the B theory of time in that case. And so that kind of supports exactly what you said. Everything is just connected. It is just all intertwined. Like the details are so, there. And most people aren't familiar with that. So, we simply look at this dual nature of life, and we just think, we're all disconnected. It's just, everything is just tooth and claw, us against them. And this sort of moves towards more entropy and decline in societies and stuff like that. It leads to narcissism and selfishness and division and stuff like that. And it's so captured in our language because our language is very dualistic. And so it's really hard to put these concepts into words, so to speak, But the way that you're doing that objective is really cool because you're kind of tying in a lot of these things that we can really find out, and make it make sense, so to speak.
Well, the nihilistic view, the word gets thrown around so much, and I think a lot of people, they have different understandings of it. Who was the author, the Crime and Punishment guy, Nietzsche, right? And he talked about the nihilistic view and stuff, but he has a very interesting solution to that. And with his approach, it's very much like what we were actually talking about. The nihilistic view to me is untenable because even people who might say they're nihilists and say there's no meaning, life doesn't actually have a meaning anyway because it's not intentional. It's a process. It's a natural process. So nihilism is really kind of an unnecessary qualification, in my opinion. It's more about how we're actually approaching life rather than what life actually is, in my opinion. So we have a natural thing inside of us that we tend to want to protect children as adults. It's just a natural thing because children represent our future, even if we don't realize, even they're not our children, right? Well, there's always going to be broken people. There's always going to be broken minds. That's kind of like what you were talking about with, personality disorders and things like that nature. But I'm talking about the macro on the whole. Right, exactly. But on the whole, I would say 99.9% of the healthy adults in this entire planet, if they were to walk by a stream and see a little child splashing around drowning, 99.9% of those adults would jump out into that water, even if they couldn't swim themselves, and try to save that little child. I believe this. I have no statistics I could point at. This is just a personal theory of mine or idea, if you want to, but I do believe it's true because that child represents the future. And that's really where this desire to protect them comes from. We want to protect innocence and stuff like that, but really there's a real reason to it. And that child represents the future. The elderly people, they actually give us a direct connection to our past. They are literally a living representation of the past, right? Because they've been there and done it. We haven't yet. So we want to care for the elderly because there's a real selfish motivation for that, because it's a direct connection to something we can't actually have direct connect to directly ourselves because we haven't experienced their experiences. So that every single person, and as the healthy individuals, right, the middle age, the healthy living our strongest point in life, when we're in the middle of our age where we're adults, we have the ability to go do the work, to collect the resources, to build the houses, to collect the food and all this other stuff. So every single part of life represents a necessary part of our existence. And because we're going from little babies all the way up to the senior citizens, this creates a loop. So the meaning, quote unquote, of life is that loop. It's that cyclical loop. And so it should never disappear just because we don't use the word, quote unquote, meaning. The nihilist says, oh, there's no ultimate meaning. Well, there doesn't need to be a meaning. It's simply a process. And we can't buck up against that process because it's a natural process we have no control of.
Right, I agree. That's what it kind of means in, I guess, spiritual terms, to be in alignment with what is,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the idea of teleology is really given a bad pass. It's given a bad rap, I think, because of the because of the response to religion and creationists and things like that. I think the scientific community has been looking at things like teleology with a lot of suspicion and denial. They don't like teleology. They like to look at nature as sort of a blind, completely blind process, which I think we're at a point though now with all the evidence that's converging is that teleology is actually detected and tested for in biology, at least. And it goes back to what objective ethics says. It's like there's something within nature, unspoken, you don't think about it and conclude, yeah, this is what I should do. I should save kids when they're splashing around drowning in water. No, it's more reflexive. And when something is reflexive like that, intuitive like that, that's sort of like nature expressing itself through you in a deterministic sort of way. In other words, you didn't really conclude or freely come to that choice to save the drowning child. No, nature expressed itself through you to say, go save the child. It may have its own reasons. You can conclude, yeah, like Objective was saying, the future, we need children to seed our future. We now know that evolution doesn't just work by, the strong shall survive, we shouldn't save people. We should always be out for self. That's not how evolution works. Evolution is a species wide sort of phenomenon. So individuals may do certain things that seem altruistic, and that's for the betterment of the whole species, of the whole group. And so there's this kind of baked in natural reflex that's expressed through individuals, and it actually goes to benefiting the species as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But
you
that's
know,
exactly what I was saying. It's just consciousness. It's just the will of consciousness.
right, right. And that's so interesting. Like I've been watching every day. I've been binge watching this biologist named Michael Levin, and all of his research is just pointing at everything we're talking about. And he's tying it into AI too, because this is kind of directing us and kind of guiding us and helping us understand how we can do the research and development with AI, that we can sort of understand how human brains process. We can understand how nature does what it does. Like he was mentioning something as an analogy. He said it's kind of like the way that nature works, as it turns out, more or less, is kind of like the analogy of a triangle. Let's say in nature, a sort of slanted line evolved for whatever reason, and then another line next to it evolved, and so now you've got this little arrowhead point. Well, nature just fills in the gaps and creates that bottom line to make that triangle. Evolution sort of just fills in. It's not necessarily programmed for it. It's not necessarily evolving towards that triangle-ness, so to speak. It just fills it in naturally. And so AI seems to work the same way. We can kind of save a lot of energy with these free lunches that nature gives us through these sort of Platonic, Neoplatonistic forms that seems to supervene on these biological systems. So that goes a long way with what Objective was just talking about, this teleology sort of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up Plato, because when you were describing that with your triangle and everything, I was literally thinking of Plato and the Platonic realm and stuff. That is, I'm not necessarily a Platonist myself. It's a fascinating idea though, and I think it is a very interesting idea, and it does give us a way to kind of put a visual representation on very complex ideas that we don't really have a better way to articulate though. So I think there's a lot of usefulness to it, even if there isn't necessarily this realm of forms per se. And there might be. I mean, I obviously we have no way of testing that. It's a fascinating theory though.
Yeah, like Michael Levin says, the only real way to kind of test for something like that is through indirect evidence. And so a lot of his research, and he sort of stumbled upon this himself accidentally just through his research with like planaria and things like that. Like, for example, you can take like a flatworm planaria, and you know how you can cut its head off and it will regrow its head, right? So what he's done is he would say he would train like a planaria to go to a certain place for energy, for food, teach it all sorts of novel problem solving skills, or kind of push it in that direction where it would learn this stuff on its own. And it would learn these solutions to environmental pressures in controlled conditions in a laboratory. And then once it really learned that stuff and it was able to just roll with it naturally, and it kind of knew how to navigate its environment perfectly because of what it's learned, then they would turn around and chop the thing's head off, right? And the thing would grow a new head, brand new neurons, brand new brain, clean slate, right? Well, guess what? The planaria remembers how to navigate that environment exactly as before its head was cut off. And this is done like countless of times. It's like a well-known experiment now. And so he was saying what can account for this is that there's some sort of, Platonic form. I'll just say it. That's exactly what he said. He said it's something akin to a Platonic form that gets expressed through bioelectricity, is what he says. And so that's his take. That's how he describes it. But yeah, he said he uses the term Platonic form only because mathematicians can understand that, because a lot of mathematicians are very resonant with that. They sympathize with Platonism, like say Max Tegmark and Roger Penrose and all these top-notch mathematicians. They love the idea of Platonism and Platonic forms because it kind of like supports their views on mathematical structure and things like that. And so I think Michael Levin is saying that actually this stuff is not really a biological issue or problem. It's a mathematical one. So when you see this sort of memory in nature that just gets passed on, it's not from DNA, it's not from genetics, it's from bioelectrical fields that contain this information that gets expressed through these forms, or these systems. So, I just thought it was interesting to bring that up. You might want to look at it, or audience, if you guys have a chance, check out Michael Levin. Really interesting stuff.
It looks like Joel is actually familiar with that. He was posting some interesting comments about that. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it provides a functional language that we could use to kind of understand abstract ideas. So when we think of form, quote unquote, how do we really define, or how do we really conceptualize what the form is? Because like Scott, you're made up of cells, right? Molecules, different elements, right? That are technically all inorganic, interestingly enough, but you're made up of all these different physical elements. But what actually makes your form? You know what I mean? How do we describe that? What the shape that makes Scott who Scott is? There's a form to it. Same thing with a geometric shape. There's an interesting thing I read into the other day talking about, actually, this is regarding the time theories, A and B time theories, but the geometry of space, the geometry of space-time that Einstein was talking about isn't necessarily geometric shape in the way that we tend to think about it in classical logic, but it's more of how information is integrated into its environment. And then they link quantum entanglement to that. So it's very interesting how these concepts can really start to intermingle and interweave together. And pretty soon you're coming up with this ultimate theory of everything.
Yeah, exactly. Are you familiar with Tom Campbell?
The name doesn't sound familiar. I may have heard his ideas though.
Yeah, he's a retired NASA physicist engineer, and he talks about that, like he kind of like agrees with you. He says it's basically data at the bottom. So he's like he says it's when the information gets integrated is when the local conscious minds can arise to demodulate that data, through these information systems. And so we're kind of like virtual agents. Like if you had to use an analogy, we're kind of like virtual agents on a mainframe computer. You know how you have all this mainframe and you have these little thin client computers that sort of they have like a little piece of processing, a little piece of CPU or processing power, hard drive space. It has just a little bit of piece of each virtual agent has a little bit of degrees of freedom. Like it's got the processing speed and the memory and stuff that you need, but not the whole thing. It's just a virtual agent and it's shared among all these different virtual agents. So he was saying reality may kind of be working the same way, that we have a little bit of what, of the energy that nature has in total, and it's expressed, just through us, through our small local perspectives and stuff like that. So it's kind of reminding me of that. I didn't know if you were getting that from him or whatever. It sounded like you were using his language.
No, I haven't actually heard any formal theories about any of this. These ideas kind of just came up from conversations that you and Sophia and I had about consciousness in general. It really started a couple weeks ago when I was just I was inspired by what you guys were saying, and it caused me to think about this, consciousness is, what if this was just raw data, and what if this was basically essentially energy at its most very fundamental level? Because energy is just the ability to do work, right? I mean, that's ultimately what it boils down to. So it's a very fundamental, irreducible process at that point.
Mm-hmm. And it's like the language, ability to do work. Like, what does that really mean fundamentally? Like, you've got potential energy, which is like a field of all potential. You can think of like quantum superposition is like all that energy potential. And eventually it's going to statistically create an excitation. So it's almost like, I don't know if you're familiar with a guy named Lawrence Krauss.
Yeah, that's a name I'm familiar with.
Yeah, so Lawrence Krauss talks about that. Like, actually, he made a book called The Universe from Nothing, which was kind of a joke because he doesn't believe that the universe actually came from a literal nothing. It's just that he's defining nothing as no thing. Like, it's not a solid object that we usually associate with things, but it's rather a sea of infinite potential is what the quantum field is. And he said that's where everything, quote unquote, comes from, is this potential of excitation. So that's kind of similar to that idea.
Yeah, I think the universe, I don't think anything can come from nothing because it runs into a logical problem there. Now, pure consistent logic might be able to solve that, and maybe there was nothing at one point in the universe, because I do believe the universe, as we know it, is internally caused. So it doesn't need an external cause. The state of the universe that it's at right now simply is the cause of it is internal. And we know in physics that there are things that are internally caused. When I talk to theists about that, to try to get them to understand that causation does not necessarily mean external causation, because if you really think about it, there's a whole problem with trying to put a god or some type of a creator into the picture, because if the creator has to be outside of its creation, then you automatically infer time. So you have to create within time. It has to be at the same simultaneous or preceding the event, the causation does. So you can't, so you run into this problem with putting the creator outside of the creation, because time is imperative. It's a necessary condition of being able to create something or to do some work. So the eternal existence makes the most sense to me. The eternal existence of something makes the most logical sense. But something that can cause itself, any phenomenon, has a potential to cause itself. So when you look at physics, like at the radioactive decay law, for example, is a perfect example of something that's internally caused. It doesn't have an external cause, and time is not a factor in that equation, right? So we know it can happen. It's just a matter of whether it can happen out of nothing or not. And I just don't think logically certainly linguistically, with the way our language is structured, we can't conceive of conceptually. It's like trying to conceive of a square circle. We just cannot conceptualize it,
Well, it's irreducible by definition. And human reasoning cannot handle irreducible concepts. Actually, it can talk about it. We can sort of hand wave it into existence. But if we really wanted to discuss it in full, we would be at a loss of words because our language is so dichotomous and dualistic, you know? So like, I often had this conversation with Christians. Like they say, well, how can something exist before it exists to create itself? That's a contradiction. That's what a Christian will tell you. And in a way, they're right. They're true to say that. But the thing is, if you apply paraconsistent logic, it would say that reality contains self-referential contradictions, and that's okay because they're stable and they're consistent enough to generate structure. That's what structure is. And this allows us to model a self-causing universe where the origin and the outcomes are intertwined, not linearly ordered, and it dissolves into non-dualism that way. So everything keeps going back to non-dualism for me. Every time I really engage with these folks, it seems like I can always come up with a non-dualistic, paraconsistent, logical explanation that makes a lot of sense. Not saying that it's absolutely true. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that for me, the way I reason it sort of resonates with me.
Well, I think there's two major issues that I see personally when it comes to the theist viewpoint, as I was kind of mentioning before. The first problem is if you're going to just basically say, well, at the irreducible level, something had to have always existed. So we're going to put God in that as that placeholder.
Yeah.
To me, that's like, why put a God there instead of just a natural process? That's the one issue that I have. The other thing that I don't understand is like, if we're going to put something as having eternally existed that could cause things, well, time had to eternally exist at the very fundamental level, because again, like I said, in order for an effect to happen, the cause must be simultaneous or preceding the effect, and that infers time. So you can't create time. You see what I'm saying? Time, you can't create time. Time would have to be either one, internally created and out of nothing, which makes no sense, or time would have to be eternal. And if time is eternal and time is a natural process, why do we need to insert a supernatural anything into that natural process? Time has to always have existed in order for something to happen, because something happening infers time. So you see what I'm saying?
Yep. And yeah, exactly. It's more parsimonious because when you're doing this kind of modeling of reality, and you start introducing these unnecessary entities, then you have to explain those entities, and then you have to also have them consistently follow the same rules that you've outlined in your criticism. So like if it's a contradiction to say that a universe cannot cause itself, cannot cause and affect itself, that's a contradiction, they'll say. Then how do you explain God? Because God, now you're just replacing universe with God, but it's just an extra step that you put in there, you know? And, I'd rather just say that a system doesn't really arise from nothing, but it does arise from a state where opposites coexist, being non-being, cause/effect, These opposites can coexist together as a relation. So it's all relating to each other. Not necessarily a contradiction, but just the contrast, No,
this is something I talked about before with you guys, and I don't have an actual formal argument for it because these are just thought experiments, but I am inclined to lean towards this combination essentially of non-existence and existence, P and not P, actually working together, existing together. And it's the observation that provides an asymmetry. So either the whole is there, so we don't see anything that's asymmetrical from the whole being there, and the whole not being there is what we actually observe. But the whole, it once was filled in with dirt, so the dirt was there. So the ability to not exist and the ability to exist are actually intrinsic with anything that we're talking about, existence itself, so to speak. So I don't know. And again, I don't have a formal argument for it, so I'm probably not saying that in a very succinct way, or intelligent way at all. But that's kind of what I tend to think of.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is they're contained contradictions. Like there's contradictions that may be real, but they don't really have to explode the system because they're contained contradictions. So for instance, like an electron is both a particle and a wave, mutually exclusive categories in classical logic, right? Well, photons are observed as going through both paths of a double slit experiment until you measure it. So a quantum system sort of exists in what they call superposition of states that are actually contradictory under classical reasoning, spin up, spin down, alive, dead, Schrodinger's cat type shit. And classical logic does say that this is impossible. That's true, though. But paraconsistent logic would say that these contradictions are real, but they're just contained within the system itself, even these so-called contradictions. And so it works.
Well, that's what I
and it's
think
hard
is
for
so
people to
important.
understand that. I know it's hard, but the thing is, we observe this shit.
No, I think the thing that's important to understand, because this is something I've actually thought about listening to some of the things you've said and other people have said, is that, and what I know about in different discussions I've had, logic is at the fundamental level. So when we say that paraconsistent logic breaks logic, it actually doesn't.
No,
Logic
it
is,
doesn't.
we're starting to understand that logic is actually needs to be compartmentalized. So you have what they call classical logic, and that would be kind of almost like taking the macro, or like Einstein's version of relativity. We're looking at the big picture here, the large particles, right? That's classical logic, kind of helps us function in that world. Quantum logic helps us function and understand in the quantum world. Now, quantum logic might seem like it clashes with classical logic, but that's because we haven't found a theory of everything. So there's going to be a set of logical principles. So logic is actually at the fundamental level consistently. That's not the problem. The problem is that we don't understand how the different isolated types of logic work together.
Right. It part of the limitation is just our concepts, because we're just apes on a small planet, which is a piece of dust out in an infinite universe anyway. So, we have to remember that too. But the thing about that is that we can still do logic. We can still understand these things, and we can also even conceive at least a non-dualistic, irreducible sort of thing. At least we can sort of talk about it. Like what classical logic may call a paradox, nature simply is. Like, it's like a big picture, like the universe exists as a self-consistent contradiction. Simultaneously, something and nothing exists, cause and effect exists, where a quantum process shows that sort of paradox I'm talking about unfolds at every level. And so we know it works, we know it happens. It's just that our concepts may be so limited and our language is so structured into this dualistic appearance that these sort of things seem like contradictions, they seem like paradoxes. But that says more about our limitations rather than reality, Reality isn't limited. It doesn't care what we think.
Well, when we tie this all up to trying to get back, because I realize we've kind of gone down quite a few rabbit holes, to tie this all back into the concept of AI and what the technological singularity and all the other things we're talking about, this does tie into it to the degree that we're really coming up with the idea that consciousness and identity is, the identity of self and things of this nature. This, if it's true that who makes me and who makes Scott and Sophia as an individual, or we perceive ourselves as individuals, if that gets transferred into a machine, then the individual continues to exist, right? So it's like Socrates had a famous thought experiment. Now he was talking about the soul, but if we replace the idea of soul with the idea of mind, right? And we say, okay, it's the Prince and the Pauper thought experiment that he had. And we say, if we take the mind out of the prince and put it in the pauper, and take the mind out of the pauper and put it in the prince, which one is the prince and which one is the pauper? Is the physical body that was the prince and has the mind of the pauper, is he now the prince or is he the pauper? And I do believe that the mind, it gives us a real tangible way to look at the concept of what the mind is, which contains our identity here, right? Our brain, I should say, not mine, right? This contains our identity. And that is a real tangible part of who we are. So if our
Hmm.
identity is really intrinsic to who we are, then it's so much more than just me being, you know, the person that I am physically, but who I identify as, my experiences, my lived experiences shape who I am. And I think this really actually ties into the transgender, theory or whatever you want to say, because there's real interesting concept. Well, what is identity, and what really makes us who we are? So if we think about the gentleman that you showed that video of, right, he was talking about, trying to be more empathetic, and that's the one part I did agree with him. That we really need to try and be more virtuous, and empathy is a really important virtue, right? To be able to be empathetic and caring and loving and things of this nature to other people, we need to to recognize their identity itself as much as we look at the external shell of who we think we're looking at, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Because that's a direct interface to your feelings, um, as a human being, and you can. I'm trying to figure out like ways to tie in. How can paraconsistent logic apply to AI, like in help and development? Um, but one of the things that is a good question is, humans reasoning is naturally paraconsistent, right? Like we can hold conflicting beliefs all the time, like say I love my job but I hate working, stuff like that. But by modeling that tolerance for contradictions, AI could possibly become more contextually aware and psychologically realistic, like better at understanding human behavior, ethics, our emotions, and where it could see paradoxes as kind of normal. You know what I mean? And maybe that could go a long way into making AI more understanding of the human condition and be more integrated with humans, by understanding sort of these concepts, because you don't normally think about paraconsistent logic, contradictions, and all that stuff. Laymen don't usually think about this stuff with regard to AI development. But I think a lot of AI developers probably think about this kind of stuff to make AI more interface friendly with us,
Now, did we lose Sophia? I just did she pop out, or did she lose connection? Do we know what happened to her?
Yeah, she dropped. She usually leaves. I think she left a private message. Oh, she had to get out. She had to bounce.
Okay, that's unfortunate because I had a couple questions I was kind of curious about, more about the LFM model, but I'll ask her next time we get on together. I'm sure I'll be seeing you guys again over the next few weeks too, so I'll check in with her then.
Yeah. And so Joel has asked a question. Hey, off-topic question for objective ethics. Is that what you like people to call you in these discussions, or do you have some other call sign?
I do. So I am sticking with objective ethics. You're welcome to. My name is Daniel Leroy, so you're welcome to call me by my name. Whatever you like. But the benefit of being called objective ethics is it's consistent because I'm on so many different platforms because I don't create my own content. And so because I'm on so many different platforms, if people start calling me different names, then it makes it more difficult for other people who are trying to follow me, because I've got people that are trying to follow me, which sounds a little creepy, but they, because I don't have my own platform, they say, well, where can I see your work and stuff? And so, which is a benefit when I'm really excited about doing this regularly with you and Sophia, Scott, because it does give me something that I can point at and say, well, I'm part of this program. You can see me here, because if I say, well, I've been on this guy's channel or this guy's channel, these guys are always putting up a bunch of videos, and someone's going to have to scroll through all these different videos. And if people forget to tag me in the video, then they won't even know if I was in that or not. So that's why I tend to stick with objective ethics, because it gives people a chance. They can tag at objective ethics so people can search for it more easily and stuff like that. But yeah, you're welcome to call me whatever you want. I don't get too caught up in it as far as, preferences. I don't get offended if people misgender me or miscall me the wrong name, or I don't care about all that shit, you know. Whatever you want. You can call me, hey, stupid, you know, whatever makes you feel better.
So you're applying the Darth Dawkins model of marketing, right?
Oh man, now that would offend me. No, compare me to that guy. Man,
So you
what
know
an
Darth
idiot.
Dawkins.
You know, this that guy perfectly represents the antagonistic viewpoint. There are people who know they're full of shit and just have absolutely zero personal accountability for truth. They're not looking for any kind of truth. They're just looking to make arguments. You know,
Yeah.
same thing. I think with the other guy that you mentioned, I had spoken to him, and you're right. By the way, I know I'm getting way off track of the topic now, but I had a conversation. There was a guy who is talking to Lou, maybe it was you and Lou, and I jumped in when I had to go to work, and I
Oh,
was just trying to let him know
yeah.
that, hey, these arguments are not good. And you said something about, you know, I didn't know who he was, I had no idea, but you kind of gave me a kind of a background on that guy, told me that he was affiliated with Dark Dawkins, is how it relates to this conversation. And you said that he basically, the impression I got is that he's basically just another Dark Dawkins type of bully, where he wants to pick on people he thinks he can beat up. You know, he's not a real tough guy. He doesn't want to challenge himself. He doesn't want his ideas challenged. He wants to win arguments. And that's the impression that I got from what you said. Well, I was on somebody's, I think it was actually on Lou's channel a couple days following when you had told me that. And that guy popped into the comments and he never did join. Lou invited people, any theist, you know, who wanted to jump in, and he left instead of, because I was on the live panel. And I can't say for sure that's why he left, but I kind of have a feeling it was because I already pushed back on his ideas the first time we spoke. And I wasn't, even though I was polite to him, and I was very polite, like I always try to be. I'm also, you know, Lou, I love Lou to death. He's such a nice guy. But I don't know if you watched his last video he did where he had a guy who has a master's degree in apologetics, and he and Lou had like a 2-hour conversation, and that guy tried to run all these really bad talking points by, and Lou pushed back. It was a very polite conversation, you know. Lou pushed back, but Lou doesn't have the educational background to call out specific fallacies, or you know what I mean, to really. And so this guy kind of got away with murder, in my opinion, in that, you know what I mean, as far as the actual truth is concerned. And so I left
I wish I saw that.
timestamps, like, this is where this argument falls apart. This is this logical fallacy. This is, you know, blah blah blah. And Lou, he's like, yeah, I thought about you when I was having a talk with that guy. He's like, I bet Objective Ethics would have loved to have been here at this time.
Yeah.
Because I don't attack the idea of God. You know, I'm agnostic about all that, but I definitely will address the actual structure of the arguments themselves.
That's right. That's right. That's what I do too. And that's what you did with Otangelo. You were just attacking the structure of his argument. And I could look in his face and tell he was getting a little peeved. And one of the things that he always says is, a lot of people like to say, oh, you're just making a gap argument or something about, you know, creationism and stuff like that. And he goes, and I love when people try to charge me with that, because I can easily show how they're just being fallacious, and technically I'm not doing that. And then you had did that. You had said that his argument seemed to be begging the question and stuff, and he jumped right on you. It was like, no. I saw him do it. I was like, oh boy, here we go. And then you, though, stuck to your guns. You said, yeah, but in this case, you actually did, though, make that kind of argument. And then you had explained it, and it kind of like tied him up a little bit. I think he got caught. He got exposed for actually doing the thing he said he wasn't doing. And that kind of like rubbed him the wrong way. And knowing Otangelo, it probably did.
I'm sure it did, because he kept, once I actually articulated it to him where the gap was, that's when he just ran to a different argument. Instead of like articulating, oh no, I've got this gap covered here or here or here, he literally just pivoted and ran away from it. And then I called that one out because he went to like justice. He tried to talk about justice. I called that one out. Then he went to love. I called that one out. And he just kept running away from every single thing. You know, once his argument fell flat, instead of sticking to his guns and saying, no, this is my argument and I can substantiate it, As soon as I called out the problem or the fallacy, he just ran to a different argument in an attempt to try and justify the first argument, but it was a complete pivot away from it. You know, like
Yep.
like when he talked about love, when I called out justice, I says condemning people to hell for eternity is not justice. You know, that's not how we actually define justice. Justice has a meaning. The word justice has a meaning, and it's a virtue. Actually, justice is one of the virtues. And burning people in hell for eternity is not justice. I don't care if you're Hitler. I don't care who you are, Mussolini, or to pick the worst person, Mao, or whoever is the worst individual person throughout history that's responsible for the most deaths. Still burning it in hell for eternity isn't justice. You know, you could say, well, Hitler's responsible for the death of, I think the total deaths are around 50 to 70 million, because you think about not just the Jews in the Holocaust, but the soldiers, and then all the innocent civilians that died from like aerial bombings and stuff. And the number's astronomical, like over 50 to 70 million people attributed to Hitler's actions, right? Well,
Right.
if you say, okay, well, let's put someone in hell for 50 to 70 million years, fine. That sounds like justice. But saying, well, we're going to put them in hell for eternity, now you're talking about vengeance, and vengeance is unvirtuous, right? So that doesn't make justice. So then he ran away and said, well, God isn't only just, God is loving. And I'm like, well, that's not the definition of love either, you know. And then he ran away from that to the watchmaker argument. All that. It was just like,
Yeah, he does, dude.
So,
I'm telling you, that guy, he will throw shit at the wall to see what sticks on you. Like that's his biggest thing. And actually, you know, Darth Dawkins, I think they don't get along anymore because Otangelo joined his forum in that one platform. Shit, what's it called? What's that popular platform? Damn, I forget. My brain is.
Are you talking about the Think Institute? Are you talking about the Think Institute?
No, it's kind of like an online platform where people can get together and debate.
Discord?
Discord, that's right, Discord. So Darth Dawkins has a room in there he created, and a lot of people, and he goes in there to debate atheists and people like that. And sometimes Christians just come in like fanboys of him or whatever. And they all get on the stage and they all kind of like echo his sentiments and stuff. And one time, Otangelo, one thing about Otangelo, he doesn't like Darth Dawkins' nastiness, though. He doesn't like that kind of over talking kind of stuff. So what he did is he when he was in a forum one time, I saw this myself in his room. And Otangelo says, yeah, well, you know, maybe you should just kind of, you know, not be so aggressive, because a lot of these people could be on the fence and you could probably bring them over with your argumentation, but you get so angry and you get so unhinged that it turns people off. And man, Darth Dawkins got unhinged on Otangelo, man. And they started arguing. Eventually Darth Dawkins just booted him from his Discord and wouldn't let him back in ever. So they don't get along anymore because of that criticism. But Otangelo, I think he respected Darth Dawkins as far as his line of argumentation, and he's always been trying to sort of copy that. But Otangelo mainly focuses on that evidential creationist evolution argument, though. That's his big thing.
Yeah, it's an argument I just don't get into because I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I've actually learned a lot about evolution from friends of mine who I've hosted conversations or been involved in conversations with, friends of mine I've met online. So I've learned a lot about evolution, but I'm still not at the point to where I can really get into a debate about evolution, because I understand basic concepts and I understand, you know, some of the mechanisms, but I don't have a true understanding of the process. And if you're going to have a real debate with somebody who studies the subject, you better know what you're talking about and why you're talking about it. You know what I mean? Like that's really important, because otherwise what you're essentially doing is called quote mining, right? And you're just basically throwing information out there that you yourself don't even understand. And it's a great way to get your ass kicked in a verbal sense, you know, to lose an argument.
See, Otangelo will tell you Well, if you don't really understand how to argue for evolution, it means you don't understand evolution. And if you don't understand evolution, then your belief in it exposes you're an irrational person. That's what he says to people.
Well, the problem is that where that argument does get thrown around by theists, you know, and the problem with that argument is when skeptics will basically go with the expert opinion, this is not the ad populum fallacy. It's not oh no, I can't. There's another word for that fallacy. The ad populendum is the Latin for it, but it's not a fallacy because they are experts. We understand that people study a particular topic and they are well qualified. Argument from authority. That's what I'm trying to say. You know, it's not an argument from authority because we understand the authority is an actual authority in the topic itself, and also their authority is based on evidence. That's the difference. You know, so when we say that evolutionary biologists are probably correct, evolution is a well-established theory because it's based on evidence. When you have an opposite where you're saying, well, it's just based on claims, religious arguments are ultimately based on claims. There isn't the empirical data. If there was the empirical data, skeptics wouldn't be skeptics, they'd be religious. Even if they were skeptical, they'd be religious because there'd be data. But there isn't data. And whenever we try to look at the claims of data, we find out that they're either misunderstanding the data itself or they're literally just fabricating stuff. They're just making shit up. So when you see that happen enough times, the skeptic will lose faith as that being a reliable source. You know, so that's the difference. There's a major difference there.
Yeah, and that's valid. It's called the appeal to experts. That's a valid premise to base your argument on, appeal to experts, because it's an argument from authority when you say, well, I believe that global warming is true because Britney Spears did a speech on it and she convinced me, and she believes it, so it must be true. Like that's because she's not an actual authority. You know, an actual authority would be valid to appeal to. But you know what a lot of theists do is they'll bring up that old Christopher Hitchin line where he says, I will never snuggle under the comfort of consensus and pretend that I'm so secure in my beliefs based on consensus, because history has shown time and time again that consensus changes over time. So
there's two elements to that. The Britney Spears example is absolutely spot on. That is part of the argument from authority that makes it fallacious because they're not an authority in the actual subject. But the argument from authority has a second element to it that a lot of people don't realize, is that you can actually quote an authority. Like you could quote a physicist, right, on a particular topic about physics. But if you're only quoting their opinion and not their actual research, that is also fallacious, even though they are an actual expert. So when you're quoting an authority, in order for it to not be fallacious, it needs to actually be something that's based on data. Their argument itself needs to be based on data. And as you know, being an authority in something, most people who really know what they're talking about because they actually have studied the actual data. You know what I mean? That's
yeah.
So it usually goes hand in hand, but not always. People can talk out the side of their neck all the time. So you have to be careful. But the other thing about it is that leads to a different fallacy called the Galileo fallacy.
Yes.
Which is something that Christians can commit all the time. They say, well, you can't trust evolutionary biology. You can't trust scientists because science has been wrong in the past. And that's actually a fallacy. So you have to basically the crux of it all comes down to, in order to not be fallacious, you have to make your arguments based on something that is empirical, or you have to understand informal logic and know what a valid argument and a sound conclusion, know what the differences of those things are. Otherwise, you're going to end up in something fallacious.
And two, something that was pointed out, I think one time when I was putting together a syllogism last weekend, and you actually pointed this out, is that the nature of the claim was a little bit off from what because I think I was making a syllogism for non-dualism, and And I went back and I looked at the syllogism. You were absolutely right, because like I'm always saying that who really knows the truth about stuff? We don't have access to that by my own definition of, you know, non-dualism and the limited mind and things like that. So I'm not really, so when you frame, say, an argument, I try to stop, and I made that mistake on that syllogism, which I should have listened to myself, is I never try to frame things in terms of truth. I try to frame things in terms of just valid reasoning, or it's rational to say X, or it's more rational to say X than Y, right? Those kind of things I'm a little bit more safe to say, because whenever you try to frame things as true, that's kind of given like an absolute sort of distinction, right? And science doesn't engage in truth. Science engages in evidence. So they're not really, and that's why they're open to change their mind with new evidence. You know, truth never changes by definition. Truth would never change. It's just the truth. Science doesn't engage that way. It's not like religion. Religion engages with truth claims. And that's why they can never change their mind, or they can never have different perspectives, even though they do, because you've got over millions of different sects and religions and denominations and all of that.
Well, that's the problem when we start to make syllogistic arguments, which is why I've had to really put so much work into my arguments for morality, because there's two angles to take for my argument. My argument is based, and these are not my own ideas. These are philosophers have already discovered this. They call it the natural law. So part of the argument is tied to evolution, but I didn't come up with a syllogism to tie it to evolution, because a syllogism is a very specific form of argumentation. The conclusion must follow logically from the premises. However, there's another argument that I use, and I don't mind saying it now because my debate's going to be happening here in a couple hours, but it's based on the syllogism that I was able to make is based on logic. That the conversation about objective versus subjective morality is actually grounded in logic. So I could write a syllogism to justify that argument. So when you justify the argument with a syllogism that leads to a valid syllogism, the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises, and then I can look at evolution and human flourishing as the empirical evidence for my claim, which is what makes the argument so strong, in my opinion, for objective morality. I think Logan was actually asking about that. That debate is going to be happening. In fact, I do need to get off to finish, just work on my debate a little bit. But
before you
he was
go,
asking when it's going to happen. It is going to happen.
Yeah,
I believe the time is 7 o'clock Eastern. So coming up here in just a few hours. And it's going to be happening on Tristan Gabriel's channel, 21st Century Minds. And I expect it's going to be a good debate. I've put a lot of work into it, so I'm really curious to see what angle my opponent is going to go with, because there's structured arguments for both objective morality and subjective. So is he going to go with a structured argument that's got a base model, or is he going to just throw his own argument at it? And I don't know. I just don't know. He seems like a pretty smart guy. He's an atheist. I heard him do one debate against a Christian who was a friend of mine. And even though the audience was heavily religious, so they all voted that my Christian friend won that debate, the guy that I'm debating, his name's Tom, he actually won that debate. It was about is Christianity coherent? And he took the negative position, and he was brilliant because the first argument he brought up was about the Trinity. And my Christian friend ultimately admitted that it's a mystery. And as far as I'm concerned, that threw the debate right there. If you have to admit that something is a mystery, then it cannot be considered coherent. But the audience all voted for him anyway.
Of course they did. There was only one Christian I saw that tried to use a paraconsistent logic for the Trinity. And he tried to make a case for the Trinity on a paraconsistent logical premise. I think it's an old one, something that appeared in the philosophy books or something. I can't remember how that argument ran, but Yeah, Trinity is real hard to defend, man.
It violates the laws of logic. That's the problem with it. And that's why even, I believe it was even the great St. Thomas Aquinas ultimately said that it was a mystery, you know, because it does violate the laws of logic. You cannot be 100%, because the Nicene Creed dictated that Jesus was 100% man, 100% God. Well, you can't be 100% of two different things. You get a contradiction, and you get the violation of the third law of logic, which is the proposition must be true or false. So you can't say, is Jesus God? And you're like, yes. Well, is Jesus Jesus? Well, yes. Well, that doesn't work, and according to the laws of logic. So you gotta just bite the bullet on it and say it's a mystery, which is what the greatest philosophical minds did when they really looked at the Nicene Creed. Because when they came up with the Nicene Creed, you're talking about, what was that, like the 4th century of the Common Era. I mean, they were obviously, people were still really smart back then, but they didn't have the same level of information and ways to process information. They didn't have the same scope into history. They didn't have the same scientific understanding of things. So they're just throwing shit out there that other people who were uneducated just bought hook, line, and sinker without having to really justify anything. They just dictated that the Trinity was true, the divinity of Christ was true. They just told people, and they made that happen through the sword, right? Might makes right. And so that's how Christianity spread. It wasn't because it was the most logical or it was true. It spread by force, like all religions tend to spread. You know, most religions anyway. You know, Islam and Christianity in particular, they were spread through the sword. And so after a while, when everybody is believing this and they're indoctrinating their children and society is built around this, it becomes just an accepted truth. But now we start looking at things with our more critical, scientifically advanced. We have a lot more history that we've dug up, and we're like, wait a minute. Belshazzar wasn't the son of Nebuchadnezzar. He was the son of Nabonidus. So what's the book of Daniel talking about? And all of a sudden now he's talking about, we start looking at what the desecration of the temple was. And we could really look at the different parts of history and say, no, that just is historically wrong. We can look at science and say, no, there was no global flood. We know for a fact that there was no global flood. So we can start to pick things apart. And the Trinity is just one of the many things that we're picking apart. Say, wait a minute, we have these laws of logic, which is how we navigate the real world that we live in. And that doesn't make sense. It's just, it's incoherent.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, they'll run the argument. They'll say, well, the Trinity is a case of higher order consistency beyond binary reasoning or something like that. They'll never really justify it. They'll just make that statement. Like they'll say, well, God's oneness expresses unity of essence, and God's threeness expresses relational differentiation, Father, Son, and Spirit. So in a way, but aspects of a self-consistent paradox can exist, a kind of metaphysical superposition where unity and plurality and the Trinity can actually exist as an inseparable entity. It's almost like saying the quality of a corner. You can talk about the corner, but the corner is also part of the square. The square is the corner, and the corner is the square. And in that way, Jesus is God, and God is Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and on and on. But I think it boils down to sometimes people overuse paraconsistent logic sometimes. And you have to be really careful, because that's also brought up in like the Encyclopedia of Philosophy Britannica talks about that, how paraconsistent logic only works when there's no explosion. But that's the key. You can't have the thing explode on you, though.
The problem is kind of what I was touching on earlier, is that the problem with the arguments that I see is that when people we say, okay, there can't be a logical contradiction. This is what we call, traditional logic, right? That this is a specific form of logic and how we navigate a specific part of reality. Then somebody says, well, we can have contradictions in paraconsistent logic, or we can have contradictions in quantum logic. It's like, yeah, that's true, but what you're doing is you're straw manning the situation by trying to implement quantum logic into traditional logic.
Right. Right,
classical logic,
exactly.
and that is
Exactly.
actually
It
a
explodes.
straw man.
Right.
It's you cannot, you're talking about two different things, and yet you're trying to map one onto the other one without connecting. There's no bridge there. Now, if you've got a bridge, then it becomes a valid argument, but there's no bridge between
Right.
quantum logic and classical logic, or paraconsistent logic and classical logic. You know what I mean? You got to have a bridge.
Right.
Otherwise, what you're doing is you're straw manning the situation. So that's the problem I see with trying to make those comparisons personally. And the other thing I think that was interesting is that at the fundamental level is logic. It's still at a fundamental level. So we know there probably is a bridge, because fundamentally we have a consistent element, which is logic itself. So it's interesting, but until somebody can draw that can build that bridge, it's a straw man.
Well, maybe AI can do that, because I was actually, oddly enough, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was actually looking at that problem. I was suspecting this would come up. So I was kind of looking at that issue you're talking about. Like, how can AI bridge contradictions? Because that seems to be entailed in some of the things that AI is supposed to be able to do, especially when it comes to human-like reasoning versus Boolean algebra and crap like that. But I was thinking, how can AI actually bridge the two? Because the thing is, we know quantum superposition is a thing, right? We know entanglement is a thing. We know it's contradictory according to classical logic. So one argument, somebody could say, well, either one's true and the other's false. They can't both be true. And since both can't be true, then that means, like Einstein said, quantum mechanics, therefore, is not the truth. But now we know it is the truth. But we still haven't been able to bridge the two, like you said. So we're kind of like accepting a contradiction only because we observe it. Other than that, I'm sure everybody would reject such a concept. But it's not really a concept now. It's an observation for the last 100 years. So do you think AI could maybe figure out a way to make that bridge and give us a theory of everything?
I'm not sure, because as far as the human brain is concerned, we do everything off of induction and conception, right? We ultimately need to be able to conceive of ideas or conceptualize the ideas that we have, and we cannot conceptualize a square circle. That's what the Trinity is. It's a square circle, except now you're adding a triangle to it, right? It just doesn't make any conceptual sense to us. We can argue for it. We can use words like square circle, but it has no tangible meaning to us, right? No conceptual meaning to us. So I don't see the human mind being able to overcome that conceptual gap. Now when it comes to AI, the reason you can't have a square circle isn't just conceptual problem; it's a mathematical problem. And mathematics at the fundamental level describes reality. So can you ever get AI to come up with a square circle? I don't see how it's possible. But again, I'm trying to conceive of it, and that's my limitation. But if I just think about mathematics, the trueness of geometry disallows a square circle. So I think there are contradictions that really, again, trying to say, when we say contradictions and stuff, we're talking about a particular form of logical conception. And when you get into these other paraconsistent logic or conceptual or quantum logic, this is its own field of logic. And so I just don't see any bridges that are possible. It may be my conceptual limitations, but I think the bridge would have to be done at a fundamental level, which induces mathematical truth claims, right? It have to be mathematically true. And if it can't be mathematically true, then it can't be true. So we can't conceive of eternity. It's conceptually impossible for us to actually conceptualize eternity, but mathematically we know it's true, right?
Yeah.
So mathematics is what gets us to fundamental truth claims, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you can never reduce a concept like infinity. It can't be reduced by definition. It's infinite. So that's what I was saying. It seems like the human mind cannot really conceive of irreducible sort of concepts anyways, and that's part of the problem. But one debate, now that I'm remembering, I had a debate with a Christian a few years ago, and we were talking about the Trinity, and he was saying, well, wait a minute. He goes, atheistic sort of naturalist views would appeal to natural things like non-locality. And you would say those are real. Well, if those can be real, if non-locality is real, and you admit that, then how are you saying that the Trinity can't be true? But the problem there is non-duality is universal and Trinity is local to three things. Like non-locality doesn't just localize three different things. The non-local aspect is for reality, period, right? So I'm not sure. Do you think that that's a sound refutation, though? Like if naturalists appeal to things like quantum mechanics and fields and stuff like that, then how are you in a position to deny the Trinity?
Yeah, because they have to draw the connection. They have to make their own bridge. They've got to bridge the Trinity, like you've pointed out. You know, you've got two completely different concepts here. So one's really a straw man of the other. You've got to draw a bridge. You've got to build a bridge from your Trinity, which you're giving a specific identity to three independent things that are actually one thing, to something that covers everything in quantum physics. So, how are you isolating now, and how are you making that connection? So I think you're right that they have to draw a bridge. If they're going to use that as an example, they've actually got to draw the bridge that connects it. Otherwise, they're just taking something. It's a false equivalence fallacy, I believe.
Right. Exactly. And Joel, hold on. Let me pull this up. Trinity theology also looks a lot like ad hoc coping, like Daniel is saying. Exactly. It's like a cope. Because those were idiots. I mean, think about it. Why did the church fathers even go through all the trouble? I think they went through all the trouble for that because of competing with the pagans. Do you think that's a good theory? Like the fact that Trinity gods were kind of prevalent in the ancient world, and so they had to compete, so they made Jesus a Trinity too?
No, I'm not. As far as like having, when you say a Trinity gods, are you talking about the idea of the polytheistic concept of like having a council of gods? Because I'm not familiar with any religions that have a Trinity concept as far as like three gods in one. Now, I do understand that there's like modal concepts of gods. So, like a Vishnu or something like that, Krishna, or not Krishna, but Vishnu or some of the Hindu gods can actually have different modes. They could be modal in that kind of modal logic, but that's considered a heresy. Of course, the Catholic Church considers that to be a heresy, so modal oneness and things of that nature. So I'm not sure. I think what happened is because you had the Arian view, and that was really competing. You had the two different views, the Arian view and the Trinitarian view, and that was what was being hashed out at the Council of Nicaea. And so I think what it was is basically just, I can't say. I couldn't say the motivation. I would have no way of actually giving an intelligent and answer to that because I wasn't there, and I can't really say. All I could say is the circumstances I'm familiar with. But one idea definitely won out over the other idea, and once that idea was established, they enforced it. They literally forced it on people. They started burning heretics at the stake and doing all kinds of crazy shit to people.
Yeah, I can understand that. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, you're serious. And Logan says Janus. I think Janus was a Greek god that was a Trinity. Is that the case, Logan? I'll look it up because that might make sense. Because it seems like Hinduism, they didn't have that much exposure to Hindu religion in Rome. I'm sure they did with the trade and stuff like that, but I think it would be more.
Oh, yeah, because no, they definitely had the influence of the Eastern religions because of the Silk Roads. Remember, the Silk Road brought Eastern. So Christianity was heavily influenced by Buddhism in particular, which is a form of Hinduism. If you look at Jesus' nonviolence and a lot of that stuff, you could see that already fully developed in Buddhism long before Christianity came around. So the two biggest influences, the three biggest influences that came together to create what ended up becoming Christianity is you first had the Canaanite pantheon, which is where we get the Yahweh, the El, Asher, all these different kind of ideas. Then this is where it all started, right? It actually was polytheistic, but it comes from the Canaanite pantheon. And then you get the Persian influence with Zoroastrianism. And this is where you get this kind of a dualistic nature, where you get, the truth versus the lie, right? What people consider to be almost good versus evil. The monotheistic, the one God that sits above everything, which was Ahura Mazda. So the afterlife, have different concepts of heaven and hell and afterlife. That all comes from Zoroastrianism. And then you get the Eastern religion, the Buddhism, through the Silk Road trade route, right? The Silk Road brought east to west, all the way connected to Rome. And then they start getting exposure to like Buddhism and things of that nature, which come from Hinduism. And that ends up leading to what we get as Christianity. And there's obviously, in the stories themselves, you get the Greek influence of poetry. You get the Greek epics, like the Iliad, the Odyssey. I mean, if you look at like what Paul was one of the most prolific writers of the New Testament. So much of his stuff comes literally hand from hand from Greek epics, Homer's writings and stuff like that. It's Paul's shipwreck story. I mean, it's almost like you're reading a Greek epic at that point. So you see all the different influences, how they came together to create what is now our modern Christian thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a bad one. That Trinity thing is hard. I don't, I think I debated this one guy named Victor Vargas on this channel. You ought to check that debate out. That was funny as hell. But that guy wouldn't touch the Trinity with a 10-foot pole. He said, nope, I ain't going there. You're bringing up the Trinity. I have no argument for it. I believe it 100%. Can I explain it? Hell no, it's a mystery. So let's just skip that. So they already know it's kind of illogical. Well,
Joel is absolutely right. Joel's absolutely right, though, when he mentioned his comment about how they came up with the idea Jesus is God, because the Jews, through Zoroastrianism influence, had established that there was only one God. So Joel's exactly right about that. That this would be the motivating factor from giving the idea that Jesus is God, because they had to have one God, right? So he's absolutely right about that.
Absolutely. Well, look, man, we kind of trailed off the topic. And I think we've covered it pretty good. And I know you've got to get ready for your debate, which I can't wait for that thing to come on. I'm going to definitely be in the live chat if I can, and participating as much as I can. So we'll be checking out. You said that's at 7:00. Is that 7:30? Did you say?
7:00 Eastern, so 4:00. I'm on the West Coast, so 4:00 my time.
Oh, okay. What part of the West Coast are you on, bro?
I'm up in Oregon now. I used to live in Southern California. In fact, I've really lived everywhere from San Diego up to Seattle at one point or another in my life. But I'm currently in Oregon, outside of Portland.
Oh, in Oregon. Okay. Yeah, because I used to live in Los Angeles and also Orange County for a few years before I came to Florida. So I was just wondering. Oregon is beautiful, man.
It is beautiful. It's absolutely amazing. California has a lot of beautiful things too in its own right. I used to live down in San Diego, up in North San Diego County, Encinitas, that Encinitas area and stuff like that. And I really do miss a lot of things about it. I used to live on the beach too, and I miss that. But as far as Oregon goes, I mean, that's the river, one of the rivers here in Oregon that I'm riding my kayak on. It's absolutely gorgeous up here. The problem with Oregon is it's just turned into a shit show with politics, and it's gotten so crazy up here. But all of the West Coast has gotten like that, very divisive.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely, and very expensive to live too.
Oregon is one of the most expensive places to live in the entire U.S., which is crazy to think about, because up until like the last 5 or 10 years, in fact, probably the internet had a lot to do with that, but people didn't even know how to pronounce Oregon. They used to call it Oregon. They had no idea. If you said Portland, they would automatically assume you're talking about Maine. So Oregon has gotten to be a lot more well known, but it is absolutely a beautiful place, especially if you go. I mean, there's just so much. You've got the coast. You've got the rivers. You go Eastern Oregon and you get the high desert area. I mean, there's so very diverse. You go down in Southern Oregon around the Gold Beach area, right on the border of Oregon, California. The weather's a lot warmer. So, I mean, you could get into the redwood. The redwood forest actually comes up north. You got the Cascade Mountain Range. I mean, God, there's just so much going on in Oregon. It really is beautiful, but it's extremely expensive.
I got to come up there and visit you one day, man. We'll definitely have to do that. But before we go, Logan wanted me to ask you, is there going to be a discussion after the debate? And if so, I'd like to join too. Do you know about that?
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, I'd like to do that. Now, I have a friend of mine who was actually going to host the debate initially, but he's a Christian. And since I'm an agnostic and the guy I'm debating against is an atheist, he just didn't think it would be a good idea to do it on a Christian channel because the audience isn't going to give two shits what two skeptics think about morality. You know what I mean? So I switched it over to my buddy Tristan's channel, which I think was a better idea. I should have done that in the first place. And the audience is going to be a lot more diverse over there. But so my friend who was going to host the debate, A's Philosophy, he may want to do an after debate show, but he's not committed to it. So I'm not sure if we're going to do it right after debate or not. If you want to host an after debate show, be happy to do it on your channel, or we could do a debate review another time. However you want to do it, I'd be happy to do an after debate show and engage with people, because we are going to take some questions from the audience, but out of respect for my opponent's time, because he's on the East Coast and he wants to get to bed early, I don't know if he's going to want to join an after debate show necessarily, but I'm more than happy to, because I've had a lot of people wanting to talk to me about morality, and I have not been really willing to discuss too much of it because I don't want to give away my arguments before the debate. That was my biggest thing. But yeah, once this debate's over tonight, then I know Brooklyn Lou, he's been wanting to talk to me about it, and there's been several other skeptics who are interested in hearing about it, because I know that subjective morality is by and large the more popular opinion among skeptics. So
yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. I mean, even for bringing some visibility to our channel, because if people can join the after party who never knew about the channel to begin with, they'll know now, and they can subscribe if they so feel, and be part of the whole thing. So I'm all for it, man. Just let me know what you want to do after the debate, and I'll throw something together real quick, man.
Yeah, if you're up for it, I'm up for it. I mean, I got no problem, because since I'm on the West Coast, it's pretty early in the evening for me still. So I've got my whole evening in front of me. So if you're down to do it, I think that actually is a great idea. I don't know why I didn't think about that, to be honest with you. I'm kind of kicking myself now. I should have, because we could have promoted that. And that's a really good idea. So do you want to plan on that just as soon as the debate's over, jumping over here?
Yeah. Absolutely, man. We'll come right back over here. I'll set up a room, and I'll just call it, and I'll put a thumbnail together in a matter of time, and then we'll just throw it up right now. And then after the debate, we just meet in that room. I'll put the live link in the live chat at 21st Century.
That's perfect, because we won't be able to figure out a time, because I don't know exactly how long. I've got an idea. The debate's supposed to go for 90 minutes, which is pretty fast for a debate. I like to do shorter debates because it keeps the audience engaged. So 90 minutes start to finish. Excuse me, 90 minutes start to finish is actually a pretty short debate, and I think it's gonna move quickly, because we're going back, opening statements, cross-examination, blah blah blah. It's gonna move pretty quickly. But I can't guarantee that it's going to be 90 minutes. We may have a technical issue, or audience questions may run a little bit longer. So, you know what I mean, as far as that goes. But roughly, I know when it's going to be. So I don't know, as far as creating a thumbnail, if you have to put a specific time for it to launch, or how that works, how you want to approach that,
Yeah, I mean, it'd probably be a private kind of thing for the most part. So I'll just put the backstage link in the live chat, or shoot it to you, blah, blah, blah. And then we can get it out to the people that would like to join. And, and I'll just put it together. I'll throw it up. And it'll be on live on YouTube. We can stream it live, that way we get more visibility.
That's perfect, brother. And I will make sure to announce it in my openings, because we're going to do a quick introduction right before the debate. So I'll make sure to announce it in my introduction. And then after the debate closes, when I do my thank yous, I thank my opponent and I thank Tristan for hosting. I'll make sure to mention it then. And if you're in the chat itself, you can be commenting to people and say, hey, if you want to talk about this, we're going to be doing boom, and that kind of thing.
Yep.
So that'll be a great way of doing that. And then
Let's
I'll
work
try and talk
together,
to
man. This will be our first little project. We'll work together on that.
Yeah, if you do create a thumbnail for it and you get a link, then I should be able to get it to Tristan so that he can post it, because I'm not a mod on his channel, and I don't think you can post links in a chat unless you're a mod. And so I could ask Tristan if he'll post the link for the discussion afterwards, because he's a friend of mine. He's a really cool guy. He and I get along really well, and so I'm sure he'll do it for me if there's a link available for him to grab.
Sure. What I'll do is I'll email it to you, and also just put it in the chats and everywhere else, so you can pick it up various places, so you can send it on through.
Yeah, that's perfect, brother. So if you could do that so that I can copy it into my clipboard before I have to log on to the debate, because once I get onto your StreamYard app, I don't think I can switch off to go grab something else without causing problems with my connection. I do this all on my phone. So I will need to clip it onto my clipboard before I get into the debate. That way, if I want to share it with Tristan, I can just send it to him in an email before I even get onto the StreamYard. So he'll have access to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds good, brother. Well, tell everybody in the audience here, Logan and Dave and anybody else that joined, I really appreciate you guys stopping by and supporting the channel. We were a little disorganized this time. That's partly my fault, but next month it'll go a lot smoother. We had to, everything starts out kind of rough, right?
Absolutely. All right, man. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and get stuff underway now. Get me something to eat, and then 7:30. I'm looking at that, or 7 o'clock Eastern time. I'm looking at that debate for sure. So
okay, I'll look forward to seeing you, family. You guys have a great day, and I will see you guys then tonight for the after show.
All right, man. We'll see you then, brother. All right, guys. We are out, and thanks a lot for joining. Like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. We got a lot more content coming up. And until then, we are out. Peace.